Morena councillors and staff, welcome to the last meeting of the Strategy and Policy Committee for this year. I'd like to welcome Victoria Blake, who's going to be doing a presentation for us in terms of the impacts of climate change on human health. And also delighted to welcome Brent Montford, who is the Federated Farmers President, ably supported by Jessie Brennan, the Senior Policy Analyst, and if they will be good enough, we'll invite them if they want to say a few words in terms of the freshwater report. So welcome to you all. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome colleagues on Zoom, Councillor Winters, Von Dadelson, and I think at some stage we'll have a cameo from Councillor Thurston as well. So just the opening message, which you all know off by heart, just reminding us that the meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and the recording will be available on our website after this. And just that reminder that the Local Government Act doesn't afford any protection to councillors or council officers or the public for comments that are made during the meeting and are subsequently challenged in a court of law and determined to be slanderous. So there are no apologies, there's no public forum. Are there any items that aren't on the agenda that people would like to include? There are none. Changed order of business, there is none. Any declarations of conflicts of interest? None. We're doing really well so far. So now we move to the minutes of the 17th of September, and Councillor McMillan, are you happy to move as a true and correct record? Seconded by Councillor White, thank you. Are there any matters arising from those minutes or corrections? There are none. I'll put them all those in favour, aye, against, and carried. Victoria, welcome. And thank you very much. Councillor McMillan, would you like to do the intro?
Morning, Victoria. Welcome, very big welcome to you. And so what Victoria does, and will give us a presentation this morning, is she takes that lens of the impact of climate change on human health and well-being, and the impact of climate change on our capacity to deliver healthcare. So comes from a very full background in sustainability in the health sector. And without further ado, welcome Victoria.
Ora tātou, there we go. I whānau mai ahau he tonga I te mātou Māui no ronga mai wahine tāku tama kei Tauranga Moana ahau I noho ana ko Victoria Blake tōku ingoa kei te whatua ora ahau e mahi ana. I am Victoria Blake and I have the privilege of holding the role of Principal Advisor Climate Risk and Resilience, as Councillor McMillan kindly introduced me. I have so much information on this and I'm going to try to keep this to 10 minutes, so do bear with me, but there is quite an extensive slide pack that I'm happy to share in case there's more information within that you'd like to read or know about. Now, there we go. So at Te Whatuora, we have adopted the whakatauki kaora te tai o kaora te tangata to really frame the work that we do in this space. And that whakatauki translates to, if the natural environment is well, so too are the people. And that really is the driver for the work that we do in sustainability and climate within Health New Zealand. And what this recognises is that we are actually a part of nature and not apart from it. As you will all know, we are on a pathway to significant temperature rises, and this information is taken from the IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. If we look at SPP3, which is the red line there, that is the current trajectory. So we can see that we're seeing significant increases in greenhouse gas emissions and a significant projected increase in temperatures. The SSP1 is what's aligned with the Paris Agreement, or 1.5 degrees. We are not on track to meet that with policy, let alone the activities and actions that we're actually taking. Even under a 1.5 degree pathway, we're going to see significant physical impacts from climate change, which is obviously going to have significant impacts on all aspects of the way that we live our lives. And as an example here, if we look at the bottom row there, the very low, even under a best case scenario, we're going to see temperatures increase before they decrease, which means that our children are going to see significant temperature rises. We are going to see it a lot in our older ages. And unfortunately, temperature in particular has a significant impact on the young and the old. So never mind the rest of the physical impacts we expect to experience, the heat alone will have significant impacts on our health and well-being and the way that we live our lives. A recent report, a recent paper actually has just been released on heat in children in a New Zealand context. So there are various impacts that climate change is going to have on human health and well-being. As we see changes in temperature, we see more extreme weather, we see ocean acidification, etc., rising sea levels. All of these things are going to have significant impacts on various aspects of our life. They're likely to exacerbate existing health conditions, including cardiovascular and any sort of respiratory issues, as well as new imported diseases that we haven't seen in New Zealand, such as malaria and dengue fever, due to temperatures and vector-borne diseases, etc. One of the items that I don't think is big enough on this slide, and should probably take the whole slide, is the mental health impacts of climate change. And we're already seeing those being faced by communities, particularly those that were impacted by Cyclone Gabrielle. There are new types of issues that we're facing, such as rain anxiety, which is not really something that has been significantly experienced, and many people that I know personally that you would never expect to have any type of mental health issues do get anxiety when it starts to rain. That's just one example. I could speak to that alone for some time. The other thing to recognise is that there are cascading risks. So as we look at the physical risks of climate change, there are going to be significant impacts. Basically, all of these risks cascade and end up with an impact on health and well-being. So whether that's on our physical or mental health, or just the way that we're living our lives. A wonderful report was released by Waitaha Public Health Unit, so in Canterbury, which really does start to look at these issues for that specific region. Just on that note, I'm lucky enough to sit on the technical working group for the Bay of Plenty region's climate risk assessments, and have been working very closely with Nick Newman and Jane Palmer, who are staff here at the Regional Council. We have a very strong relationship in these conversations. One of the things that the health system has done is created climate change scenarios. These are aligned with the XRB, or External Reporting Board's climate standards. And so what this looks to do is answer the question, what could climate change, how could climate change plausibly impact on population health and therefore the health system's ability to deliver services? Under the guidance of the climate standards, it takes 3 scenarios. It must do one above 3 degrees, it must do one aligned with the Paris Agreement, or 1.5 degrees, and then another scenario. You can see on the slide here the areas of focus that these scenarios took for the health sector. What we didn't look at was the infrastructure. So obviously health has got significant infrastructure, but we didn't need to look at that because building and construction or property and construction rather, had already done their own set of scenarios. You can see in the table there to the bottom left that we are expecting to see significant impacts on mortality and morbidity within relation to climate change, particularly under the hothouse, or the status quo as it can also be named. However, we could see health improvements if we took aggressive action on climate change. I was asked a question recently in a presentation that I gave, so what for New Zealand, which is a question that often gets asked in the relation to climate change, and we've got such a small contribution globally, why bother? The point of that is that actually us making our own strong commitments, at the very least will improve air quality. At the very least will improve physical activities, cooling. So it actually has some real benefits for our own people, even if we've only got a small percentage globally of the impacts it could make. So a lot of the actions for climate are actually really significant improvements for people's health and well-being. I won't go too much into the scenarios, but the publication is available, it's publicly available, and actually I do recommend that all sectors have a look at these scenarios, because what it is talking about is how people are going to be impacted by climate change. And I think that that's something that is important for any large organisation, not just because they have, because they have staff, but also you rely on people. So if we think about it from an economic perspective, which I really hate to do, but we have to do that from time to time, where are rates coming from is an example for councils. If people are unwell and unable to house themselves, they're certainly not going to be supporting local government through local taxes. The other thing is that councils have a responsibility for people as well. So, to really understand how climate change may impact on communities is going to help you to find solutions that may benefit them. And as I mentioned before, but here's just another example, basically every single physical risk that we will experience through a changing climate, and we're already doing that now. So even in a 1.5 degree pathway, which is our hopeful or our dream world scenario at the moment, we're already seeing significant physical impacts, and that isn't going to stop. That is going to continue. And this example here, which is just talking about, heavy rainfall, you can see the significant number of cascading risks or health impacts, health and wellbeing impacts that will stem from these issues. At Te Whatu Ora, we have our own responsibilities, and we have a work program in place that is looking at these 4 key areas. And I'm sure some of these are quite similar to what Regional Council is doing. We have a commitment to decarbonisation or emissions reduction with no coal by 2025, and we're on track for that. To realise co-benefits through the way that we provide our services, to integrate sustainability into the core and into policy. So how are we considering climate change in all policy? Because actually considering climate change in all policy is considering health in all policy. And then obviously the piece of work that I am focused on, which is the resilience and adaptation. So how are we going to ensure that the health system is able to deliver services in the face of climate change? I've just thrown some stats in the bottom there because I want to shout out to my colleagues who work in emissions reduction. We've achieved a 14% reduction in emissions between our baseline and our second year of reporting, which, sorry, but that's pretty amazing for a system as big as ours, mainly due to the coal-fired burners being decommissioned. And just to touch really on recent events. So obviously this is not super recent now. These are images taken from Cyclone Gabriel. We were very lucky in the Bay of Plenty, really. We got off quite lightly compared to some of our whānau. And the thing that is of interest is that while it was devastating, Cyclone Gabriel was only considered a moderate scale event. So if this is moderate, what's a large scale event? What's a catastrophic event? These are the things that we need to be considering. Cyclone Gabriel was expensive. If we want to go back to the numbers again, there were over 2,000 injury claims. There's still so much going on in Tairawhiti and in the Hawke's Bay, and people lost their lives. Not to mention the trauma that was faced by people in those communities. And I think the thing that we really need to remember is that this event is not over for the people of those regions. So I took these photos a year ago. So I have a lot of whānau in Hawke's Bay, as I mentioned in my opening. I went down last year to my niece's 21st. It was in Napier. As I drove over the hill, so for those of you that know the Napier Taupo Road, as I came down into the valley, you can literally feel it in the air. You can feel the grief, you can feel the event that has happened here. And this is a year later. These are some of the photos that I took while I was going through that area. So this is 12 months later. These communities are still dealing with this now. So this is another 12 months later. They're still moving silt. They're still dealing with the impacts of this. Some people are still not back in homes. These are the things that we need to be considering, and this is just one event. The other thing I just wanted to share from the 21st that I attended was when one of my niece's friends found out that I worked in climate, she had to talk to me. She took me aside for about 20 minutes. It was basically a wreck. There had been alcohol involved. It was a 21st after all. and shared her stories of the event for herself. If her brother hadn't have woken because something woke him and got them out of the house, it's unlikely that they would have survived. The fear in this girl's voice and the trauma that she was facing as a 21-year-old who just needed to tell me her story and showing me the videos that she had on her phone, it was really scary. Now, that's just one story, but these are the types of events that are impacting our communities. And as councillors, you have responsibilities for those people. That's bleak, sorry. We're doing some work, so, you know, and there is action happening and there are things that we can do. The health system has done a key infrastructure climate change risk assessment, and I understand that the council is doing similar work. We've supported Manatū Hawara, or the Ministry of Health, on the creation of the very first Health National Adaptation Plan. And if you're interested, there's a public webinar tomorrow afternoon that's talking about that plan. We're also assisting the Ministry of Health with a vulnerability and adaptation assessment, and that's going to be of interest to local government, as we will be looking at how, creating some modelling and some data centres that will really give you some information on how, health and wellbeing will be impacted by climate change that you can be using in your vulnerability assessments. I've already spoken to the scenario analysis that we did, and the other big part of my role is more of a facilitator, is to map across the organisation all the different parts that are working in climate change to make sure that we're working collectively and together. And there's a lot of places that we partner with council and local government in that space. And then obviously we have our own work to do and how we're going to ensure that we're resilient. There's still things that we don't know. We do need to develop a deeper understanding on the impacts for us here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So we have a lot of international research that we can lean on. And we also need to understand both the financial and the health cost of these things, particularly under the various scenarios. But also, just to reiterate, aggressive action on climate, regardless of our global contribution, will have significant benefits for the health and wellbeing of our communities. Kia ora.
Oh, Victoria, thank you. Wonderful, sort of. Yeah, bleak, but maybe some hopeful. So, councillors, questions of Victoria. Councillor White.
Tēnā koe te tuahine mō tō mahi pai, tō kōrero pai, mō tō whakātūranga pai, kia mātou e tēnei rā. Kei te miho te kia koe. Yeah, just, I'll add several words here, awe taukiri e. There's another way of saying, oh, heck or hell, because what you've sort of delivered to us is almost like, it seems like a lost cause in some ways. And you put on there 70-year profile in 2090. Most of us around here are top that age, and you start thinking about your mokopuna future. So for this particular council, we obviously around this table to make a difference and try and influence that change, and we're probably a small part in the big picture. But where do we start in this particular situation? Where would you reflect that we should start as a starting point, given this picture here, and given that we are working, between a rock and a hard place often? Maybe it's too big a question. But
Look, I think that's a great question. Where do you start, and how do you not be freaking out about it all the time? But to really find solutions for a problem, you have to understand the problem, and that's where we are at the moment. Is we're really trying to understand what is this problem, and therefore what can we do about the problem. So once we understand how communities are impacted, where the issues are likely to be, where our risk areas are, and what some of those solutions are, we can start to put those solutions into practice. So we know that community is a really important part of recovery. So what can we do about ensuring that there are community spaces, that we are planning for community spaces that aren't in climate risk areas? So an example here is we know that marae, for example, always become a place of safety and refuge after events. So how can we ensure that, one, we're protecting those spaces as much as we can, but how can we also be creating spaces similar that are in areas that aren't so at risk to climate for those after the event? And also just continue the amazing mahi that you are doing in the environment space. Like that is your responsibility. So ensure that you're continuing to do that, because biodiversity and nature are part of the solution, at the very least, to protect our health and well-being in the face of things that we cannot control.
Thank you very much, Victoria. A lot of what you've been talking to us about intersects with our activities and our interest, and I'm just thinking civil defence, emergency management. You're looking at our communities, and we're looking at our communities and trying to ascertain what we need to do to meet their needs also in a slightly different field. Is there a way that you can share data and recommendations with us where there's an overlap of interests?
I think that is, so the Health National Adaptation Plan that I mentioned earlier, one of the key actions in there is really figuring out how we can work better with councils to be sharing information. And we just had a brief conversation earlier around, we don't have enough resources across this conversation to be duplicating. So how can we be collaborating more to be, each taking a piece of the work? One of the comments I use often is ego is the enemy of climate action. Like we actually have to work together. And I guess we're sort of lucky and we're sort of public entities that we don't have intellectual property that we're trying to protect. So as long as we're understanding that we're sharing in good faith, why would we not do that? So it is a work in progress. There are some areas where it's happening very well. But yeah, the work could definitely be done, but the door is certainly open.
Councillor Eadie, then Councillor Shirley.
Kia ora, ngā mihi ki a koe. My question's around the policy settings. You mentioned that the current policy settings aren't going to meet our obligations under the Paris Accord, and look like, if I'm not wrong, we're heading towards the more hothouse greater than 3-degree increase. Are you talking about national policy settings, or because we set a lot of policy ourselves, and have you looked at our policy settings and where do we sit on that?
Great question, and no, I have not, but I'm happy to have a quick look at that. I'm talking more nationally and globally. So nationally, we're sort of not too far away, but we could be doing more work. But from a global perspective, there's quite a significant gap. There's a website called the Climate Action Tracker that provides a lot more detail on that, and I did have a slide in the pack that I've taken away. So short answer, no, I haven't, but I'd be happy to have a quick look and provide that information.
And just a second question, because we're facing quite a few tensions between the central government indicating quite clearly that they want to up production and exports, and the tension point between that and environmental practices, and protecting the environment. Are you finding the same tensions within the health sector between the policy settings that are coming out of central government and you achieving the goals and the strategies that you've already set?
I really appreciate that question. Unfortunately, I cannot answer it as a government official, but appreciate the noting of that constraint.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you for the presentation, Victoria. I have a number of questions. You mentioned, and undoubtedly there's a connection between climate and health. But you mentioned the anxiety of many people with the commencement of rain. Equally, there's a lot of communities who get very upset when it hasn't rained for a while. Very farmers who would certainly like to see some more rain. You also mentioned the adverse impacts of temperature increase on health, but there's also adverse impacts on health with cooler temperatures, more whooping cough, diphtheria, colder homes. We have thousands, tens of thousands of Kiwis who migrate to the Sunshine Coast and the Gold Coast for increased temperature, for a warmer climate. And the threshold there is much greater than the 3 degrees we're talking about here. So it's really a question of perspective. And I guess what I'd really like to hear from you, we've sort of touched on it, but several times you said we need more aggressive action on climate change. Could you spell that out? What items of aggressive action would you recommend?
Sure, I'm happy to, but I think again, I'll just refer to the Health National Adaptation Plan, which has a significant number of actions that would really benefit human health and wellbeing. Urban planning is one of those examples, continuing support of public transport and active transport, because that actually has benefits for both the climate and for people's physical health and well-being. And I don't deny that cold temperatures also have an impact on climate change. It just wasn't the focus of the conversation that I was having today. And also do want to acknowledge that drought is also a significant impact of climate change and does have very real impacts on farming communities, and has for many times, as does flooding, to be fair. So do not want to disrespect or not acknowledge the impact that farming communities have from various aspects, including some of the policy levers of climate action. But from a council perspective, I'm potentially more city council, but really urban planning, understanding social determinants of health, supporting healthy homes. There's a whole bunch of other policy levers that impact on climate, but also support our communities more broadly.
Councillor Crosby.
Thanks, Victoria. I live on the coast, Papamoa, and over the last 20 or 30 years, we've imposed coastal hazard management, flood inundation mapping. And my question is around people's attitude from a health perspective. We often find the she'll be right attitude, disbelief, apathy, I don't care. How does Te Whatu Ora do any work around people's attitude towards what's here now and what's coming in the future? It's very hard in our space to work positively, when they are fearful of their house price decreasing and things like that.
I mean, that's a very fair question. And actually some research has just been released, which has looked at COVID-19 response and potential responses to climate change. But because it does not seem immediate, it's a frog in a pot of water, right? It does make it really hard for people to prioritise this, particularly in the current environment, cost of living, please don't put those lines on my report, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I completely understand that. And I think really it's just about education. And we heard that we did an event, a panel event for the Tauranga Western Bay Climate Festival, where some of my colleagues from Becca went and canvassed the community and asked them what they wanted. And really, they just want to know more. They want to know about what's happening, and they want to know what they can do for themselves. So supporting education is potentially something, but I don't have a tangible answer for you, because as I say, we're still in discovery mode to try to find solutions to these wicked problems. Thank you.
Kia ora anō. This particular presentation, the minute you look at it and see it, it's shock horror. That's what it sort of immediately does to me. Is, whoa. It doesn't say that I don't understand it. It just says, wow, when it's put down and you show it, how have we done many presentations like this around the Motu? Because I think the instant you'll get those as, wow, no, I'm not going to believe that. No, yeah. But there'll be a lot out there that would actually connect with this particular presentation from a sort of it is a shock horror, wake up, smell the roses, this is happening. So what's your experience with this particular presentation? Because it does, for me anyway, immediately gel things that, I do connect with a lot of this, but a lot of people would be really dumbstruck in the context of your presentation. What's your view? What's happening?
So this is actually my first strategy committee that I've presented to. So do feel free to tell your councillor friends if you'd like me to speak to them as well. I often speak to senior officials. I've spoken at many conferences, quite an avid speaker at the moment. It feels like I've got 2 this week. Again, it's about education and just sharing the information. I will let you know that occasionally there's a puppies and kittens slide hidden in the pack to try to bring some smiles, because it is very bleak. But the way I stay positive is I get to share this information and hope that other people understand that actually rapid action on climate is not just about reducing emissions, it's about protecting people's health and wellness. So tell your friends.
Thank you. I just wanted to reflect on the issue of anxiety. And Councillor Scott, you might recall that we attended at the beginning of this triennium a hui at Judea Marae with adolescents and talking about climate change. And I was absolutely struck, can't talk for my colleague, but at the level of anxiety that was demonstrated by those young people. It was something I'll take away and remember for some time. So look, no further questions. That was a very, very great presentation, Victoria. All the best. And thank you very much indeed. I just did also want to reflect on your message to us about collaboration across agencies and organisations, and that's all about community governance. We aren't the only people involved in governance. It should be, holistic. So thank you very much indeed, and go well.
Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Kia ora.
Thank you, councillors. We're now going to move to the freshwater program report.
Tēnā koutou. Are you happy for me to? Tēnā koutou to the chairs, councillors. We're on page 23 of your agendas. Today, we are seeking your direction in terms of freshwater policy and next steps. I'll shortly hand over to the team to run through the presentation. Then we have also invited our guests, Federated Farmers, to say a few words following as well. So this is all about next steps in freshwater, where to from here, and you'll certainly hear staff's recommendation that we do continue conversations with key stakeholders on key components until we get some certainty from council, so from central government. So over to the team.
Quite. I wonder if I could just say a couple of things. So this report is not just about next steps. It's also about looking at the budget in terms of the annual plan, and it's also looking at the deep dive risk assessment. The comments that I want to make are, I want to acknowledge staff in terms of this space. This has been a very frustrating year for us, but this just follows on from a very frustrating few years because this journey started in 2012. But I really do want to acknowledge the frustration, but I also want to acknowledge the professionalism that staff have demonstrated throughout this process. This has been extremely challenging, and I personally have huge respect for the professional way in which you have continued to give us the very best of your advice. So thank you. So yeah, without further ado, over to the team, and then we're looking forward to Brent and Jessie joining the conversation before we have a discussion. So thank you.
Kia ora koutou. As a lead into this, when I was trying to put the report together or run my eye over it, it was a bit hard to say what the technical position was. So the first sentence in the executive summary for me summed it all up. So it's a difficult position for councillors and staff around the water program, and so this presentation is around resolving or trying to resolve that. There are three parts to the program today. The presentation, the way forward, the part on the implementation and budget, and then the last part is the risk overview, which was asked to be brought to this committee rather than to audit and risk. So what I thought we'd do is we'll run through the whole presentation. It is a short presentation, and then come back to part one, and the discussion will just flow from there. So with a bit of luck, we can get through the whole presentation, and perhaps if we can hold our questions to the end. I was going to say good luck. So, and we're going to share the presentation a little bit. I'll just do the context. Nikki will talk about the options. James doesn't know it yet, but he'll be helping out with the implementation budget part, and then Nikki's going to come back and do risk. So the first part of this is that we all acknowledge the uncertainty. The changing government direction is continuing around us. Previously, we were waiting for a cabinet paper. The idea was that would give us some direction. We're not sure it'll shed much light on where we find ourselves now. Rather than go through the why, I think we're all fairly familiar with the why this policy is needed, what we're looking for in terms of environmental outcomes. We think we have developed a good product. It will solve problems, it will be more efficient and effective, and will address some of the environmental issues that are out there in the world. The one thing, though, that we keep landing on as staff is that a conversation with our community, our stakeholders, is needed. And that's the bit which leads us to our recommendation.
So the options we have prepared follow your previous decision, which is what we're seeking to have replaced today. The last decision was to release a draft in November, and for various reasons that didn't occur. So we're looking for that next step to be decided today. We have framed them as 4. The key decisions really are around whether to release the draft before or after the National Policy Statement for freshwater being re-gazetted. Potentially, the government is saying in June next year. We are seeing some indications that seems to be behind schedule, but we haven't had any statement to that effect nationally. So the options, the first is to release the draft with the draft farming discussion document on options in March next year, with very careful messaging around recognising the need to pivot when the NPS for freshwater is gazetted, and then to release the whole draft farming rules in September, and then you'd have to look at when to notify after that. We're not asking for a decision on notification date. That's just a few steps too far given all of the uncertainties coming. We're just asking for decisions around release of the draft and this concept of topic testing. So the second option is wait for the National Policy Statement for freshwater before we release the draft. We'd need to release the whole draft regional plan and the discussion on the farming document at that time, if you wanted to retain the option to notify the following year. If we delay the release of the draft, we would like the option to continue lower key topic testing, so discussions with parties on working draft considerations to get their feedback and their thinking without releasing a whole more formal draft. So that's what you'll see in the topic testing item at the beginning of option 2. I'll come to that briefly shortly. Option 3 starts to push the release of things out further. So the drafts get completed, we get them to a near complete stage, but we don't release them. And that's steering into the headlights of RM reform and looking to release them under whatever that is. I'll come to recommendations shortly, but option 4 has been raised of could we release modules or parts of the plan. Releasing parts of the plan that maybe are more certain or enable and streamline and are less contentious and go forward that way. So you wouldn't release the rest of the draft until after the NPS 2025 was gazetted. So on page 28, there's some summary assessment in your report, and on page 28 as well, the summary and preferences come through where we're recommending option 2. And we have some rationale there as to why we're not recommending the other options at this time. So we can carry on with the presentation and then come back to your questions once we've finished the presentation, I think. But in terms of topic testing, the key topics we're considering it as the main topics we would test and discuss out there with groups, the offset provisions, and particularly in certain localities,
provisions around enabling environmental enhancement more, so sediment detention devices, constructed wetlands and so forth. Discussions around the farming land use options for reducing contaminant losses and the water quantity limits, particularly where there's some tricky issues to resolve. I'd note that all of those conversations have been started in 2023. The public has heard generally about these proposals in that 2023 engagement, and some have had further discussions, like the Tuapiro community had the opportunity for more discussion on water quantity back at that time. So it's not new, it would be continuing the conversation rather than leaving a vacuum. So I think from here we continue through the rest of the presentation, and then we can come back to your particular questions.
So I'll just pick up on the implementation and budget discussion. So this, in a sense, comes across from the draft annual plan, where a certain reduction in budgets was put into the draft annual plan that you've seen. And at that point, we said we need to have this discussion and do more of a zero-based approach to what's required around fresh water to then inform the next iteration of the draft annual plan that's produced. So savings from the program itself and what's known as freshwater implementation, but is almost the operational side of things, were already provided into the draft annual plan process. Further reductions are also proposed in here on page, I think 32 is the summary of that. The number 3 becomes important in the absence of the more robust policy that we were hoping to bring forward. Some of these projects become even more important. And our water accounting system is a good example of that. Without policy, we need to be far more rigorous and far more detailed about our water accounting. And potentially there's all these further changes depending on what today's decision is. James, are you happy to talk about some of the... So what we did was we asked the staff to prioritise a list of projects, and that is attachment 4 in your agenda. But these are the ones which came through as the priority projects to be retained in that implementation budget.
Right, this is the bit I wasn't expecting, but I'll give it a go. So obviously we've talked a lot about accounting systems, and as Stephen said, one of the challenges that we have, if we don't have a strong policy framework, we do need to have really robust science that can be used in a discretionary consent setting. So effectively there is no policy to say what sustainable is, but we do have some really, really robust science sitting behind the scenes. So that's what he means when he says, you know, if we don't have the policy in the draft plan sort of out circulating in a sort of formal sense, we need to sort of really sharpen up the science. So item 3 there, for example, land use monitoring data sets, again, is part of that, that context, that science, that evidence base that we need to make decisions. And it's really hard for the consent planners to make decisions if they don't have strong policy, which is, again, that's what we're trying to do through this freshwater program. The catchment group support, well, that's just something that is ongoing and has been budgeted, and we believe should continue to be budgeted. And likewise, that item 6 on the list, which is around continuing to support those large number of sort of iwi hapu programs and projects which are feeding in all the time to our evidence base that we can use for making consent decisions. So, for example, at the moment, most significant freshwater related resource consents require a cultural impact assessment. And the reason for that is because we don't have the information in-house that we can use to avoid those impacts in the first instance. So that program of works is all about trying to gather that evidence, get it inside this organisation so that we can prepare better plans in the future. So yeah, hopefully that helps sort of give a little bit of a context for what some of that budget is all about.
Just another addition to number 6. So for example, if we hit 2026 with the 600 consents coming in, the consents team doesn't want to be talking with iwi about each consent. So the streamlining might be that we can get out ahead of that, make the process more streamlined for staff and for applicants, rather than saying there are 600 consultation exercises that need to occur here. So it's those kind of things. So that's like a resource consent, basic resource going into there. The next part was the risk overview. So again, this comes from the Audit and Risk Committee, and the request was for a deep dive into fresh water, and obviously it connects through to this program.
So attached to your paper, there's a long deep dive risk table. Attachment 3, page 40. Some of you may remember an earlier one similar, and that's been updated. So the key thing is that risk of legislative change is an event now that we know is occurring, and I don't think we'd be having these pauses and conversations if we had set stable legislation and national policy in place. So that's the main event that is, I guess, creating some of the questions and challenges for your decision making at the moment. Some of the key risks that you'll see are around the where to, in relation to where to from here. Things like the risk for water quality if we don't get our rules in place sooner, or our options out there and discussed and worked with sooner. And also for reputational risk, potentially for not acting on matters we've talked about with the community before, and science and data risks. If our material that we've relied on for this draft is getting, I guess, dated. On the other hand, the risks that you've been concerned with around releasing the draft or moving forward ahead of the NPS for fresh water in particular, whether we confuse the community at the same time that the central government may be engaging on their national reforms, and then with the fact that we may have to then rework the draft somewhat before it becomes proposed because of reforms that follow. So you've got risks either way, which is partly why this is such a difficult decision. And I guess we're left with uncertainties still that we hoped were going to be clearer or more certain by now. There are other risks listed in there on those many pages. So happy to take questions when we come to that further down the track.
So that's the presentation. Hopefully we touched on the main points. So we just go back to that slide on the recommended option. So I think Nikki's touched on this, but in a sense, we're recommending option 2 on the basis that the MP7 will be sorted. This obviously is, we've talked about momentum a number of times, and our view, as I expressed before, the stakeholder conversations remain critical. Even yesterday, talking with catchment groups in Apokotani, they said they want to have the conversations. The option 2 still focuses on environmental results, environmental outcomes, and is based on that no regrets. This retains opportunities for council to notify and retains that momentum. And so particularly as that last point. So if the council does in the end choose to notify at some point, that option is retained. And so that's the recommended option. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Before councillors ask questions, I wonder if it's an appropriate time to invite Brent and Jessie. Specifically, you've had discussions and you've looked at this paper. And you know what the staff recommendation is. So just invite you, if you wanted to come forward and make any comments, particularly in relation to the recommended option.
Thank you, Chair, councillors and staff, for the opportunity to just say a few words today. We really appreciate it. And we also appreciate sort of the challenging environment that Bay of Plenty, along with other regional councils, are currently in with, a lot of moving balls at the moment. So yeah, we think that's been highlighted really well in the staff report. At a high level, we do support the recommended option, which is option 2, releasing the draft policy and plan changes following the new MPSFM. We're really encouraging councils at the moment to wait for a little bit more certainty from central government. Hopefully we'll be coming in 2025 at some stage, but appreciate that, yeah, it's all a bit of a moving feast at the moment. However, we do also see some potential merit with option 4, which is that module approach. It's not entirely clear to us potentially what modules that might include, but really why we would potentially support option 4 as well as around, I guess, allowing farmers to get on with things that they want to get on with. And I've got Brent here today as a sheep and beef farmer, but also with all the various hats he wears around the place to speak to a bit more of the grassroots perspective on that.
Yeah, thank you, councillors, for allowing us to come and say a few words. I back up what Jesse's just said there. We support the team on recommending option 2. We've had very good dialogue and worked really well with your team. They are really professional and get it. From a farmer's point of view, the reason why we talk a little bit about option 4 is that some of us want to get on and do some of the stuff we need to do to help enhance our fresh water. And what I'm getting at there, just from a practical farming point of view, for example, if you've got a reasonable catchment area and there's when it rains, all the water washes down the hills. Some of us would like to be able to build retention dams and detention dams and things like that. We're not talking about high risk ones here. We're just talking about small ones in different spots that just slow the water up and it catches the sediment and also results in things like not having further, when the water gets its volume up, as you know, that's when you get erosion issues further down the track. So if the council could look at bringing in real simple, straightforward plans for the right type of operators to work with farmers to do those things in certain areas, those are things we could do now and actually be ahead of the game before we get to, you know, the full on policy being implemented. So that's the sort of thing I'd like you guys to think about. One of the other things I'd point out too, I'd really like, I don't know how many of you have been on very many farms, and I know that some of you have gone and visited the odd high profile farm where they're doing some great stuff. But just think about it, it'd be really good, because you're going to be making some big decisions moving forward, to come out and see a few other farms and just see what's going on and get a real eye for what we're talking about, especially around slopes and things like that, where you know, there's potential for slips or there's not potential, all that sort of thing. So that when you're sitting here making that decision, you can actually visualize what's going on out there. In the Bay of Plenty, we're lucky because we actually have a very diverse land, you know, so there's some of us up in the hills, and then there's the flats, and they all have their the good points, and they also have their what I would call their break points or their problems. So it would be really good to consider that if you were to come out and see some of our farms, and it might help.
And just on that, Federated Farms is more than happy to help facilitate those visits and that sort of thing as well. So I think we'll leave it there, but if there's any questions or comments, we're happy to take those.
Just before I do open it to councillors, yes, I'm aware, Councillor Shirley, there's the suggestion with regards a bit of a hybrid here. Option 2's clearly got a unanimous support, but there's also the recommendations around some of the aspects of option 4. Can staff comment, please, in relation to that?
Sure. So Remember, all of these recommendations are only around release of a draft, enabling you to make a choice later about when to notify. The option 4 is releasing modules of the draft that have material that's more enabling, or that has material that streamlines and improves and simplifies the plan, that may be less contentious and so forth. Or could go further and choose parts that you are comfortable to release for that more broad feedback. Progressing further with modules, we would say there's pros and cons to with actually notifying modules, because as we know with Plan Change 9, you come under a lot of scrutiny as to whether and why you haven't implemented the whole of the national policy statement, which says that you'll implement it in reasonable timeframes. But you're likely to get those challenges either way at the moment, I think. So releasing whole parts of draft plan provisions on topics like the detention buns on OSET or other parts enables people to really look at the detail and give more detailed feedback than they can when you're just talking concepts. So there's benefit to releasing the parts. There's just those risks that you then end up with quite more confusion, and the concept of actually taking modules right through to notification has its issues, given that if you were only going to notify one whole plan at some point, you would want to weigh up is the benefit in releasing the whole draft. So that's where you get a bit stuck, I think, with the modules element. If we're topic testing, rather than releasing the whole part of the draft as modules, you're testing those parts, and you could talk about actual wording with groups of people in a managed way where you're really talking through it to make sure that the confusion is minimal, and you're really testing those provisions. So that modular one has issues if you carry it right through to proposed, I think.
Okay, questions, Councillor Shirley, Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. I think my question's just been answered, but I'm not sure, because I had that same point. I was looking at option 2 and the benefits of option 4, particularly with Brent's comments. So is it possible to have some sort of hybrid of the two, or not? I just see there are some benefits in that option 4. That was question 1. The other point I made, just observations through the reports and right in the recommendations, we have topic testing informally with stakeholders in tangata whenua, and it's right through the report. Are tangata whenua not stakeholders? I would have thought they're key stakeholders.
First question. So the enabling group of things is one of our topic testing ideas, and that is things like detention funds, that is constructed wetlands, those kind of things. So that's something where, in a sense, if we did the topic testing and it got to a point where everyone was comfortable that we could perhaps do a module on that, then we'd say that'd be the way to progress it. So in a sense, arguably, a bit of option 4 is already sitting in the background of option 2. Perhaps we'd consider it that way. So the best way of doing it, we still would have those discussions rather than saying, we're going to notify this bit, what do you think? We'd be saying the topic is detention buns. Can we have a discussion to make sure we get that right?
The other question I had is, earlier you described the ramifications and issues with the universal application on resource consents of cultural impact assessments. I understand with the derivatives of the RMA that universal application will no longer be there.
This comes back to what our plan says. So in the future, we will see what happens. And that's certainly one of the signals from central government, but our plan is saying these things are required. So just an example of that is we all know about the new information around water quantity. To put that into place, we really need to have some kind of discussion with our community, including tangata whenua around this. So we'd rather to do that once as a topic test, rather than saying it comes up every time consent comes through the door, and 600 are coming through the door in 2026. So that's the kind of thing we're trying to say, streamline whatever way that looks like. And I don't have the actual operational delivery of that yet, but that'll be the concept.
Well, can I come back to my earlier point? Because you said with with, informing the stakeholders and tangata whenua. And my point was that tangata whenua are stakeholders. Would it not be better to put stakeholders, including tangata whenua, rather than and tangata whenua? Because it implies that they're not stakeholders. And I think that's objectionable.
I think it's just the way we've always looked at the way tangata whenua sit in the RMA, and the way they have the consultation requirements that spread across the community. So it's not saying anything particular other than that.
Councillor Scott, then Councillor Nees.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. One was on around that modules and I think I've heard now that in fact there's a sort of a benefit in that you get a deeper dive into a particular topic. Which brings me to the second question, which perhaps Jesse might be able to, which is about the value of lots of consultation versus the risk of over consultation. And are you happy with what's being suggested? It's not too much, and so that people get consultation fatigue. And then the staff might mention on some other stakeholders whether they're seeing any of that.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that is a valid point around the consultation fatigue and things. But for us, in terms of that deeper dive approach, we've, as much as it can be, workload and trying to, for us engaging with our members and making sure we're getting a really good understanding of how this would roll out at the grassroots. It is a really important exercise for people. I think farmers, particularly at the moment, and Brent perhaps some comments on this as well, they've been knowing that this is coming for a while, and there's been a lot of uncertainty with that for people on the ground as well. And actually getting an idea of where council was thinking, pending that, with this module 4, that there is able to be a wider discussion that we could have with, members and that sort of thing to inform our views. But that's probably a conversation for a later stage. I think there is a lot of value in that deeper dive approach. And while there can be consultation fatigue, this is stuff that directly impacts farmers' businesses. So there will be that buy-in, I think. Brent, do you have any further comments?
Yeah, I agree that, we don't want to stop talking about it. It's important we get it right. I think farmers most people are fatigued about is changing the direction all the time. Need some certainty where things are going so that we can get on and invest in our businesses and do what's right. We all want the same thing. We all want good fresh water. We want plenty of biodiversity. We want all those things, just like everyone else does. But we want to get it right. And that part's important. But what's been happening over the last 10 or so years is that you just get on one track and someone comes and diverts us off onto another track. So I think we're all on the same page with that. We want to get on and finish it, do it right.
Thank you.
Just before, I just want to check, is that what you're also hearing from other stakeholders around the traps?
Yes, sorry, and I could mention this too with Kiwi. We sort of an ag advisory group. Jane does, Ken does, Doug. And so when I'm talking about farming and also thinking about kiwi fruit, all those other areas too, sorry, but yeah.
Well, thank you. I've got a hodgepodge of comments and questions, so I apologise for that. Part of what is worrying me is part of the wicked problem we're facing is that we've got sequential layers of change coming at us. So we're waiting for the NPSFM, which will give us direction on things like Te Manawa Tuai and whether they're going to be included in our plans. But then we're going to be having the RMA reforms that are coming through, and we have been told very clearly that there will be fewer consents, that there will be more focus on private property rights, and that there will be limits set, and you can go ahead and do something as long as you can show you meet the limits. So I'm a little bit worried that when we go out and we're talking to people that we might be talking about, oh, well, this will be a permitted activity, or this will be a restricted activity, or this won't be allowed, when we know that there might be significant changes coming at us. and we might have a draft plan and then the rules will change on us. So when you go out, and I support going out now, don't get me wrong, I think we need to, there's a hiatus and people are calling out to get some indication of where we're going with this. But when we go out, are we going to say, frame it in such a way that people know that there may be a situation where all bets are off and we have to do a significant pivot, not just a little pivot, but we may have to be changing the structure of where we're going if the RMA changes are huge. Because what I don't want, having been through Plan Change 9, going out and talking to people about a certain sort of way forward, and then all of a sudden you get a new way forward, and we had judicial reviews and all sorts of things, and quite a few unhappy people. So will we be, when we're going out and talking to people, framing it in such a way as we are clear that this is what we're thinking at the moment, but things may change?
So the short answer is yes. Perhaps the longer answer is that regardless of what happens, there will be a set of property rights and there will be a regulatory framework. And so whether it's permitted, discretionary, or new words are invented, the property rights will shift. Coming back to the private property rights, that's not actually what central government's saying. They're saying a focus on property rights, which is a little bit of smoke and mirrors because they're always property rights. And the law sets the property rights up, but there'll be different property rights. So in a sense, the same fundamental basis for planning will still be there. The question is that all the levers will be different, or they may be different, or the settings might be different. But we wanted to be quite clear with who we talk to. And that's why particularly we're saying we are talking to stakeholders rather than the community. Because we're saying the stakeholders, for example, if we're talking with Whare farmers, they know the stuff. We can have a quicker discussion to get past that and then to start talking about detention bunds, which is, that's what the real question here is, like, what are your problems with detention bunds at the moment? How might they be solved?
Right. I can understand what you're saying there, but I've been in a meeting with a group of farmers where a minister has said you should be able to do what you want on your land within reasonable
look, I absolutely get that, but they've also just put about a national direction around the inability to plant trees on the land. So there are property rights, but the question is, which ones are we talking about? So they cannot do that because of what the government has just done. Yeah. So that's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
There'll be a different set of property rights in play.
All right. So then moving on to who we're going to talk to, our stakeholders and tangata whenua. At the Agricultural Advisory Group meeting the other night, the farmers from the Little Waihi catchment were asking, can you come and talk to us soon? Because we are facing huge uncertainty and we ourselves have got some very big and hard decisions to make. And can you come and talk to us sooner rather than later? That's what they said, isn't it, Brett? So can you include selected people within very sensitive catchments where we think there may be major change as part of this testing? Because they have got a greater stake than many, as opposed to an industry group. They're the people that are actually going to wear the cost on their lives. So can we think about, is that a possibility to include some people in some very sensitive catchments where there's likely to be a major change?
Yes. So we can work with the industry organisations to work with groups of farmers in, say, existing catchment groups or in catchments most affected to have some targeted conversations. And I guess the opportunity with that topic testing is that it's not a big public release. You're able to talk to specific parts and get to detailed matters in a way that you can talk about the confusing elements and work through those. So yes, we could. That's partly giving us that flexibility to do that enables us to have those conversations that we'd like to have. We've been a bit uncertain whether we can do that or not at the present time. Just coming back to your point about the RMA reforms, as soon as those principles came out, of course, they get into the discussion and people are gazing at what that might mean. But there's this material we're hearing so far, there's not a lot underneath each of those principles yet saying what they actually mean or what they will mean. And RM reform, we've seen flip-flop. I think I'm hearing a louder message from most sectors now to look for enduring, agreed, don't change this every time, get it right for New Zealand type of message. It may or may not land in the term that we're hearing it will land. And then there's quite a period of time before a regional plan or its combined new plan has to be replaced. So what we're talking about here is work towards a draft and a notification for a plan that will live until that time, until whether that's 6, 8, 10 years away, we don't quite know. But it's looking to replace our current 20-something-year-old plan.
Right. Well, just one further question with your indulgence, Madam Chair. It's about, or two actually, it's about the freshwater accounting tool that we're talking about budgeting for. Is that an opportunity to be developed nationally? Are there plans to develop a nationally consistent water accounting tool, or are you talking about buying an off-the-shelf product that will work for us? What are we talking about here?
Yes, if I can answer that one. Absolutely, there's indications that there will be a national solution. So what we're really talking about here and now is just an interim fix. We've got, a bunch of scripts and GIS already kind of working. We just need to get something on the other side of that firewall that the public can use to get a good sense of where the accounts are at now, to streamline consents until something national is developed. Yep.
And then the final thing is, in the risk table around, the risks and potential mitigations, there was a comment with regard to the expiring pre-RMA consents, those 600 consents we've got to deal with, that one of the mitigations is that we could ask for an extension for those consents for maybe 2 years or something like that, to give us the opportunity to get the plan up and running without having to process them with a half-cooked plan. My question is, are we thinking about doing that anyway? Has that conversation progressed at all at a national level? Because there are a lot of people in this situation.
I believe the advice was that either the applicant has to apply for you to be able to consider a pause, and then there's only so far you can go with pushing that pause, or you have to ask for a legislative change really to achieve it. As far as I know, that hasn't been pursued nationally to date.
Okay, the batting order is Councillor Von Duddleston, Councillor Eadie, Councillor McMillan, the Chairman, Councillor White. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I look at the risk matrix with the assessments between the four options, and my preference actually is for option 4, the modules. When I look at that, it says the one area where that falls down, as it does in option 3, is in water quality, and I'm not sure that that's actually correct. I firmly believe that if you have a look at page 44 of the document, it says with regards to water quality, the current estimates are that without new rules, existing degraded catchments are unlikely to improve. Well, I think that's a very raw statement, because there's work going on at an on-farm level, at a catchment level, as we speak. And I take locally just here the Kopereri-Rua Valley catchment, where we're doing, and our regional council has spent $1.2 million on Riveria alignment as it heads, that stream heads into the harbour, where we are doing major work right now to for flood mitigation to so that the silt is trapped rather than going straight out to sea. So, you know, to say that that's a risk because things won't happen. Well, I just totally disagree with that. And the problem is the science. The science is still uncertain, and I'm talking here about E. coli in particular, which is one of the key degraders within the region. So I think we actually have to work with our community, when we say our stakeholders, you know, our farming community, because they want to do the best. They want to do what's right. It's part of their livelihood for the ongoing. But to say that we have to rush this now, so they have total certainty. Well, we won't have total certainty until we actually have government direction actually confirmed. So, you know, we rushed Plan Change 9 and then had to get it stopped because we hadn't measured adequately water quantity. We still haven't resolved that. The science is there for doing that, but we don't appear to have. You know, we've done some work on it, but I think we're well behind some other regions on using satellite data to measure water quantity. So there's a lot of big issues here still, and I'm all for pausing. And I know farmers want certainty, but they only want certainty if it's going in the right direction for them. And the certainty that staff have come up with on this plan is certainly there's areas of concern there for me for a pragmatic, realistic approach to good science and improving water quality issues. Thank you.
Councillor Eadie.
I thought staff might be answering that question from the councillor. My question is with regards to, well, with all the uncertainty which is floating about, there's one thing is certain, that the government will be seeking to remove principles of the treaty from sequential from the national policy statement, from RMA reform. I guess they're wanting to fundamentally shift the relationship. I guess my question is, as we head through this, and you mentioned meeting with the stakeholders and tangata whenua, and around the consenting, streamlining the consenting process with regards to tangata whenua. My question is around, are we going to start socializing or having those conversations as we go out? For myself, I think it's actually really important to be upfront about the situation that we're in and to front foot that, because we're going to have to, you know, some people might argue it's just semantics. I'm not sure if our iwi partners will necessarily agree with that. Also, there's going to be, there's the indication that, or the central government has said that they will honour treaty obligations, but then that starts to create a little bit of a tiered system with regards to when we go out, those who have been settled and those who have not settled yet. So that's my question. I just want to get a feel from staff on how we're going to approach that. Like I said, it's my feel. I'm sure my constituency councillors will, Māori councillors will agree. Actually, I think there's consensus around the table with regards to this council honouring the work that we've done with iwi and the partnerships that we have developed. What's your thinking about when you're going out and doing this work and starting to indicate how we manage that?
My view, and Stephen or James may add, we can acknowledge across all of the proposals that we're seeing from government, when we're talking with communities, we can acknowledge what they've put out into the public arena as their indication of where they might be heading. But as a regional council, we don't implement until legislation and policy is actually formed and been through its process, so we can keep them alert to where those things are at. And we're implementing in accordance with the direction you give us and the legislation we're under at the moment. I do think that you may find that some iwi and some groups may start to ask the regional sector and regional councils what position we have and whether we're submitting on those things, and that's not a question I can answer. So I think it's good to be alert to that, because I think you'll have that question. I believe we did have that question under some things, under the NBA and things like that, where parties wanted to see the regional council's submission and position.
Well, Madam Chair, I just think it's really, and I understand the position of staff, and I absolutely understand that we can't preempt anything before it's in law. But in terms of the strategy and going out, I think it's essential that we face those realities and that we get in early with those conversations. Now, whether that's the governance rangatira, ki rangatira conversation, rather than having to put that all on staff. But I certainly think it's something we have to really think about as we head into these conversations, and we need to strategize so that we have the levers to put into place so that we're able to do that and have that conversation.
Thank you, Councillor Eadie, absolutely. And my apologies to Councillor Von Dardelson. I should have asked staff if they wish to comment in relation to his comments. Do staff wish to comment at all?
Just to note that I understand from Councillor Von Dardelson he's supporting option 4, which is to release draft parts of the plan now and continue topic testing the others. So it's actually moving faster than option 2, which may not have been his intention.
Thank you. Councillor McMillan, and then the chairman, and then Councillor White.
Well, thank you. I haven't really got a question, but I just wanted to reiterate something that Councillor Von Dardelson noted in the risk matrix, and that is the risk that water quality does not improve. Current estimates are that without new rules existing, degraded catchments are unlikely to improve. Now, I also agree with Councillor Von Dardelson in that there are so many people out there doing so many great things to try and improve catchments at catchment level, at farm level, and we definitely support and want to continue to support and bolster and enable that. So that's kind of something aside. We also know that without rules, without the new refined rules, we're not going to get there. So with that in mind, and the fact that it is up there in black and white on our risk register, I'd like to move that we adopt, that we accept the recommendations, and that is the staff recommendation of option 2. I think it's a really sensible approach. We've heard from our guests at Federated Farmers that farmers just want to get on with it, and they want to be able to have those conversations and say what they want to be able to do on their farm. We want to get that right for them and for everybody, and we want to get in to be able to have those rules in place to improve water quality. That's what we're all about. That's the whole point of this. And if we're not able to progress with that, then there's no point in any of it. So I'd like to, as I say, move that we accept the recommendations, all of the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor McMillan. So we have a motion, but I'm going to ask the chairman and then councillor White to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I can live with option 2, but I've got several comments to make in terms of considerations I think you should refocus on. Firstly, going back to the community, you've got to be really genuine in terms of those engagements. And you heard yesterday, Stephen, that there's a question around the genuineness or the credibility of the organisation doing that engagement, and then nothing changes in terms of what's proposed. So I think you should just look at that. In terms of the commentary on page 29, the second paragraph there, there's comment about the longevity given recent history. I presume that refers to the change of government and the backflipping from, is that what it refers to?
The multiple changes to the NPS every 3 years and the introduction of RM reform and then removal of it.
But I think we've got what we've got, or we're going to get what we're going to get in 2025. The next paragraph down, you're referring to the NPS FM that gives us direction. Are you referring to the 17, the 21, or the ultimate 25 one? Because I understand what you're trying to say, but you know, I'd be concerned if you're trying to address these issues in the context of, what is it, the 21 or 22 one, as opposed to focusing on what we think might be in the 25 one. And in terms of the risks outlined on a couple of pages over, some of the risks I see here is the risk of normalisation. And essentially, I think we've got to listen to whatever the new direction from the government is. If we had seemed to be essentially ignoring it, or relative to our regional differences, let's accept that, there's a risk here they might come in and say, this is what's going to apply across the country. And maybe that's not in our best interest, but that's the risk we run if we're not genuine. And the comment there on the second paragraph in terms of our stakeholders, communities, international trade, you've heard me say before, can I just caution you, there is a big difference between the customers and the consumers. And I don't think to try to hook our wagon to the customer demands by way of regulation is very dangerous, because the customers are essentially a marketing entity and they flip and flop relative to the strategies to increase their market share. The classic example that we're dealing with at the moment, and I think you heard Ann Gillis refer to the other day, is the Scope 3 emissions being put on processors, exporters out of New Zealand that are not necessarily consumer-led, but they're customer-led to try to give them a marketing advantage. So I think we've got to be careful about where we hook our wagon to in terms of some of those considerations. But otherwise, I think, Chair, pragmatic way, agree with Councillor McMillan, option 2.
I just make the comment about staff engagement. It is always genuine. I think the issue around those particular groups we talked to yesterday is around, there's a little bit of misunderstanding of what then happened. But like, as I said in the meeting, I'll be aiming to have cups of tea with them and talk that through specifically. Yeah.
Councillor White.
Yeah, kia ora, Staffel. Thank you for the presentation. It's, you know, well prepared, well done, and I too support option 2. The comments that came up around consultation and we do too much of it. I mean, I always look at it from a point of view, it's not quantity, it's quality of consultation. We don't need a whole bulk of consultations because a lot of it is just a waste of time, and I would argue that, and a waste of resources. Is how we focus that consultation and quality of consultation. I'm sure from the Federated Farmers' point of view, it is about quality, not quantity. And being genuine about that and making sure that the stakeholders and tangata whenua are connected in the context of the intent of that consultation and getting the change that you want it to be. I was going to ask a question of our guests around consultation with tangata whenua, because I'm assuming, you know, Māori are farmers, agriculturists, horticulturalists and foresters. And so they must come across your deck around their feelings about where things are at the moment. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, they are diverse like we are. As in, so when I'm talking to Māori farmers, some think over here and others think over there, just the same as everyone else. So there's a difference between the different, you know, individual farmers or if it's a large iwi corporation or whatever. I have quite a bit to do with Ngāti Rangatihi. And I'm always talking with Leaf. In fact, I talked yesterday. So yeah, we do. It is just as diverse as the rest of our farmers, and we won't even go anywhere near GE because that's even more diverse in their thinking. So yeah, they do talk. It depends whether they're running a larger farm to running a smaller sort of, you know, whānau type farm. What I tend to find is that they are more, those that are running those smaller whānau farms are more connected with what's really going on right through the whole system, if that's right with you.
Yeah, I've just comment on that. I think one of the things about Māori farmers, wherever they are, and the shareholding of that, is that they actually don't own the farm. They respond to the intergenerational requirements.
Yep.
And you'll find I've been on a number of land trusts and the corporations, and actually part of our group that's got about 30 Māori farm blocks, and quite of them, some of them are large, and they're always bound by the beneficiaries' demand for that sort of full process of well-being. Commercial is very important, but also getting the other things. And I know comments around Leaf. Similarly, their productivity is important. You want us to produce. The same token, they're bound by these other things that create.
That's right. There's at least three.
It's at least three. So no, thank you for that. You know, and it comes down to this question as well as stakeholders and tangata whenua, because there is a different context to that as I'm trying to explain here. They are there as not as owners, but as intergenerational change makers. So there is that difference. And either way, I'm not particularly worried about that. The difference, you know, the sort of stakeholder tangata whenua, you're still going to have to deal with them. But look, just want to, if the motion is on the table, I'd like to second Councillor McMillan's recommendation, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Just for a point of clarity, that it would be recommendations 1, 3, 4 and 5. We don't need the number 2 because that's implicit that we have considered the options.
Yeah, it's just to consider them. Yeah.
Wonderful. Further questions or comments in relation to this matter? There are none. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? The motion is carried. Can Jessie and Brent, thank you very much for your participation today. And to staff, thank you. Happy Christmas. So 12 years in the making, and we've made another tiny step forward in the journey. But I just wanted to reiterate my comments. I just, you know, on behalf of my colleagues, your professionalism has been outstanding. It's been challenging. It will continue to be challenging, and the best of luck for 2025 for my colleagues who will be dealing with this. So thank you all very, very much indeed. And may you all have a very happy Christmas. So without further ado, we'll now break for 15 minutes, have a coffee, and come back to the agenda. Right, Steve. Council prioritisation and decision-making framework, and I've, sorry, thank you for the report, excellent report. So without further ado, hand over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Morena councillors. We're on page 52 of your agenda, just introducing Chris Brewer, who's worked on this alongside the Shadow Leadership team in producing this report. This responds to the Chief Executive's KPI to develop a decision-making and prioritisation framework. It's been informed by feedback that you've previously given on previous hits at this, and in particular that previous models needed a greater focus on cost and efficiency. So we've tried to capture that in this. Intended as a conversation starter. I mean, hopefully we've got it right first go, but I'm sure there'll be feedback and other things that we need to take into consideration. It starts from the premise that the long-term plan and annual plan are the key mechanisms that you have for setting priorities at a high level, but that there is a need for a deliberate consideration of how those priorities are phased for delivery, how new and unanticipated work will emerge, and the way we make decisions about how they are slotted into our existing priorities, and an agreed method for regularly reassessing priorities as the context changes. There's two parts. The first part is the prioritisation and decision-making framework with that horrendous-looking cube that we've produced, which is intended to support decision-making about what we should focus on. And then a work phasing framework, which you will have seen before, which is about once we've decided what the priorities are, how we phase them into a work program. The first of those two is probably the most important to get right first. It's based on viewing every decision on work prioritisation against three themes. The impact, which should be guided at a high level by LTP and annual plan. And this is about the value of the work that we're doing. Efficiency, which is a pragmatic consideration of the resource available, and demonstration that rigorous thinking has gone into how to deliver efficiently. And then certainty, which considers the context of the time and the level of support for the work and our control and influence over it. So the certainty is largely about mandate. We can develop more detailed assessment criteria underneath those key themes. We've had to go at kind of calling out some of the obvious ones, but there's probably work to be done developing underneath that. And then the cube, which I referred to before, I guess is a way to visually represent those things and help map work respective to each other. Essentially, if it's on the upper deck of that cube, we should be delivering if it's in the green, or we should be looking to move towards certainty or move towards resourcing if it's in the red. If it's on the lower deck, we should be questioning why we're doing it and whether any resource allocated to it should be allocated to the upper deck. Just to be clear, this isn't suggesting that we've got a whole bunch of work sitting in that lower deck at the moment. It's more about as new work comes in, where would you slot it? That then leads to the phasing model, which, as I said, is about how the work is phased. And then the proposed next steps would be to refine based on your feedback and to potentially use it as a model to come back to on a regular kind of program to, as the context changes and as new work comes in, to use it to make decisions. That's probably enough for me at this stage.
Blimey. No comment. Councillor Nees.
Thank you. My recollection of our request was to review the framework, not to design it, not to redesign it, because what we had was we had a framework which had identified priorities, which was based on the Labor government policy settings. And so therefore what we had was some priorities that had been identified, and this was going to be done now, and this was going to be a couple of years out, etc. And we said, well, the environment's changed. We developed our LTP under the Labor government policy framework, and now we're in a different environment with a different government and different priorities. So could we have that reviewed because it didn't seem fit for purpose since the operating environment had changed. So I was a little bit surprised when it came back like this. But the thing that I'm really struggling with is we are in such an uncertain environment. Everything is uncertain at the moment. So I appreciate what you said, Steve, about we're only going to be looking at new work when it comes in, but even our new work and all of our existing work is hugely uncertain at the moment. And every day we get new information about what's changing. And I'm just thinking about the regional deals stuff, where you've got new information coming out all the time, which is causing you to rethink, should we be doing this at all? Should we be doing it this way? Then you've got, for example, the minister's letter on the private share funding targets for public transport. One letter completely turned the world upside down. So I guess my question is, should we be locking ourselves into a framework like this in this environment? And that maybe we need to be prepared to be more nimble until things settle down, and perhaps not endorse this sort of really rigid system, because every day things are changing. So that's just a question. Is it still going to be relevant, or are things moving too fast for us to consider having something that we review every 6 months?
Yeah, ultimately that's a decision for councillors and whether this would be useful, because there's no point in investing if it's not going to be useful. I guess one comment would be in a world of so much uncertainty, having a consistent framework applied to the decisions you make might help manage some of that uncertainty. But if there's a view that you don't think that would help, then it's probably worth leaving until. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Excellent work. I've made some notes on it, so my questions might sound a bit note-like. Apologies for that. But first comment really is I really like, and sort of in response to Councillor Nees's question, there is a focus on being adaptive, which I really like about it. And the other thing I love about it is it's the partnership aspect. So both in the impact section and the certainty section, about the level of community/partner support for the work and whether the work is supported by relevant agencies or TLAs. And I think that automatically, if we follow this framework, that will push us to partnering more, which I think is something that we've all identified is really important, and sort of in reference to our discussions yesterday even. So some of the questions I've got, the first one is the alignment with LTP outcomes is just a bullet point in the impact box. So in my mind, if we're following a strategic plan, shouldn't those strategic objectives be over the top of everything rather than just a point to refer to? So how does that talk to that?
Yeah, I agree that the LTP outcomes should be the guiding star for this. Yeah. I guess part of what this could help address is the fact that if you're creative enough, you can make just about any piece of work fit into an LTP outcome.
Right.
So if we design this well, it could bring some rigor and discipline to how we make those assessments.
Okay, cool. Okay, that makes sense. I've got a few more questions if you can bear with me, Chair. Thanks. So but things like behaviour change, and as well with nature-based solutions, environmental restoration, sometimes the kind of low-hanging fruit are the easy wins, but the more effective and change-making things can take a long time to establish and be harder. So my concern was that this matrix could have a leaning only like towards low-hanging fruit, like the easy wins, and therefore risk not going for some hard long-term choices which are harder and take longer. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I would say so. Part of the cost efficiency, one could be the development of a kind of consistent return on investment framework potentially, which would, if done well, might lead you towards those kind of longer term outcomes that
Right.
produce a greater benefit.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking with it talking to the Three Horizons model, that might cancel that risk out because you've got short, medium, long term. And with the green line, it's not that you're not investing early on, it's just that you're ramping it up over time because it's a harder, more long-term project. But yeah, I just want to make sure that with that framework, we're not going to move away from focusing on mode shift, for example, or focusing on nature-based solutions that are harder, like making room for rivers, where the easy ones are let's plant a bunch of trees, bang, done, bit of pest control and we're there. But making room for rivers, climate adaptation, and potentially manage relocation and retirement of land and land use change are really long-term, difficult, expensive decisions. So I don't want to risk losing those. And then my final question was about the three priority areas, so climate change, community engagement, and relationships with Māori. How do the prioritisation areas fit in with the prioritisation model? Do you have your strategic direction here, your LTP? Then you have your three prioritisation areas, and then you have your decision-making prioritisation models. Is that how they fit together?
It's how they could fit together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perhaps I can add to that as well, once you're done,
Yeah.
Stephen. Yeah.
You go for it.
Oh, no, I was just going to mention that as part of your LTP, that those three prioritisation measures became BAU and got integrated into your outcomes. So those are no longer sort of standalone items. Your overarching strategic framework outcomes, the 5, are the overarching ones.
Okay, I think I kind of, in my mind, we were still reporting to those 3 areas as well as the 5, but okay, that's fine because that makes sense. Okay, that answers that question. Thanks very much.
Councillor McDonald.
Kia ora, thank you for the report. I actually like the report. And so I actually support what you have done. For me, it gives some clarification around exactly what we're going to prioritise on. The only issue that I have with it, and taking into consideration what Councillor Nees and now Councillor McMillan is that we are still guaranteed some provision of flexibility. And I think then that will take care of the issues that have been raised, particularly by Councillor McMillan, because to that extent I agree. But what I like about this is that you have mapped out, give us some strategic focus on how and what we're going to be moving forward on. And that's what I applaud about the report and what I like about the report. So I think we probably just need more, I don't know, we don't need more discussion, but I think we just need to have some level of certainty that if something does come up that we need to include in that priority, whether it's first, second or third, that also becomes part of focus of what you're. But for me, I actually I like this because, all too often, I suppose I can speak for myself, when we're coming to these meetings, I mean, afterwards, you're almost brain dead about where it all fits into the spectrum of what we're having to address. And that's what I like about this. So, yeah, for me, I like it.
Councillor Crosbie, then Councillor Eatey.
Yeah, thank you. We asked for it. Sometimes be careful what you ask for. But thank you for that. It's a really good start. A couple of issues I have is, and I don't know if it's deliberate, but on page 55 in terms of the themes, in my view, certainty should be at the top. Because unless you have a degree of certainty, it's a waste of time after that, or potentially a waste of resource. Also in the certainty, we need to have a focus on what's legislatively required. I'm not sure if that's been picked up. that strong. You know, some stuff you have to do, irrespective of whether you like it or not. And the last comment is, I think it's a little weak on the financial impact. Yes, you say it should be prudent. Well, prudence means different things to different people. And I think we should, if you're going to carry on with this, needs to beef up, you know, how it fits in with our funding and financing policy, blah, blah, blah.
I agree with that. Thank you.
Hello, Madam Chair. You know, I'm supportive. Thank you for this. I think I agree that it's, with so much uncertainty, it's good to have a process, a consistent process. But I do understand Councillor Nee's hesitations around adaptability to, and especially around possibly the review cycle, and us being able to adapt as well as weighting adjustments as we need. Would be good to have some flexibility in that. Just as like if you could give me an example, just around the clarity around the horizon assignments, like how would decisions be made about which projects fall into Horizon 1 versus Horizon 3, especially where the timelines depend on legislative changes?
I think that's possibly where certainty comes into play. So, you know, you could phase work that you have certainty about now earlier on and work that you have less certainty about later. And then the other factor you'd consider would be dependencies. So there'd be some items of work it doesn't make sense to start until you've completed or at least progressed earlier work. And then I guess the final would be available resource. So is there resource available to do the work?
And I guess that's the adaptability part too, around if certain grants or certain funding pools become available and how we make adjustments.
Yeah. And I completely agree with your point about regularly reviewing the weighting you apply to each. Like we've just put a nominal 33% weighting against each, but at the moment you'd probably want finance and certainty weighted a bit more, I would expect, given the environment. Yeah.
Further questions or comments? Is someone prepared to move something? Councillor
I'm
Eaton?
happy to motion the recommendations, move the recommendations.
And are we happy to sort of include a bit of a catch-all that the staff will actually capture some of the comments?
The directions from council.
Directions from today. Okay, just add that in to the wording, Jenny, if that's okay. Is there a seconder? Seconded, Councillor McDonald. Further debate and discussion? There is none. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour, aye. Against, and that is carried. Well done. Thank you. Excellent. Right, now moving on to Mount Maunganui Airshed report. Aaron and Mark. And the shaking is apparently the Tauranga City Council building next door. So who's talking to this report? Is that you, Mark?
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me. We do have a brief slideshow, 4 or 5 slides. So if we could just bring that up as well, please, and I'll just run through that. Thank you. Thank you. All right, with a airshed management plan, this is optional. It wasn't undertaken with Plan Change 13. The plan change is well underway when the Mount Airshed was gazetted and became announced as polluted in almost very short order. So it was decided to continue with Plan Change 13, and then the court itself made a strong recommendation for an airshed management plan. To achieve the objectives of Plan Change 13, it's felt there'd be a reputational risk if the plan is not developed. Staff are anticipating more Environment Court hearings with the court, and there'd be an extent of being protected from accusations of not having perhaps done enough, or so should an airshed management plan be developed, then there's that perhaps confidence that council's done all it can in this space to protect air quality. In terms of considerations for an airshed management plan, there's plenty of existing plans and documents from a few different parties. Our own Plan Change 13 has been further bolstered, if you will, with provisions for bulk sealed material handling, and then more recently, unsealed yards and Policy 12 for iterative management. TCC have had a couple of plans, one folded into another for the Mount Arataki Spatial Plan. And then perhaps most recently, Priority 1, their Mount Maunganui Industrial Environment Accord. Something of a mystery to us, but it has been developed, and so it's out there. There's also this sort of sense of public confusion. All these documents, if you're not closely involved in their development, it's a case of, you know, what is it and who's doing it. And also we're aware of consultation fatigue. There's people who've been asked to give their time and their comments. And why are we asking this again when we're still waiting for concrete outcomes, I suppose? So that's another consideration. So in terms of an airshed management plan, our suggestions are develop the airshed management plan as per the court's recommendation and this committee's agreement. Limit it to regional council's role. Otherwise, numerous other views may slow down the process. PM10 and ODA, again, as sort of previously agreed by the committee. A time frame, sort of nice and sharp, 1 to 2 years. Rules already in place through Plan Change 13. So this is really looking at what the court has strongly recommended. And in terms of consultation, the Mount Air Quality Working Party, we think, should inform the airshed management plan through the consultation process rather than recommend the airshed management plan as previously suggested. Given the 1 to 2 year timeframe, we feel that should the Air Quality Working Party recommend the airshed management plan, timeframes could well sort of drag out. And we're, with the court and community wanting to see improvements in air quality as soon as possible, we feel it's better to keep the scope and the timeframe tighter. And in terms of identified actions for the airshed management plan, many of these have come from the court's interim decision, the first interim decision. You can see them there from the review and scope of interest of other forums, monitoring, both the review of monitor locations as well as an assessment of monitoring, which comes from Method 1 in Plan Change 13. Investigating dwellings within the Mount Industrial Zone, the court had a concern with this, and it's something that we can work with TCC on. And then, as you can see, the last sort of few matters, review of an annual average guideline value for PM10, advocacy. Some of that's suggested in terms of Kiwi Rail, and we'd look at that in terms of ODA as well. And then finally, a review of consent clauses. So in a nutshell, that's very much what we're thinking for an airshed management plan.
Thank you, Mark. Questions? Councillor Shirley.
Yeah, I was interested in the Priority 1, Mount Maunganui Environment Accord. Could you tell us just how did that come about? Did they consult with you? Was there discussion? Was there...
No, it seemed to be a process that they undertook themselves. My understanding is there's 25 to 30 major industries involved with it. They've had an undertaking each to come up with several improvements that they can each make on their site and to hold each other accountable. But the visibility of what those things are is yet unknown.
I can probably add a bit to that, not a lot, but they did present at our last Mount Air Quality Working Party group, and a lot of the businesses that have signed up to that voluntary accord did attend. Oh, is it? It's on, but it's not close enough, sorry. So yeah, I mean, like you were saying, the scope is pretty broad. So my understanding is because it's voluntary, there's no formal accountability except the opportunity to hold each other accountable in a kind of peer-to-peer model, I guess, to raise the bar, but it's not necessarily addressing PM10. They could do something environmental that's not, that's outside the scope of this airshed management plan, and that would still count to 2 or 3 actions. It could be planting some greenery or getting better recycling waste management mechanisms in or whatever. So that's kind of how it kind of sits with this. It's my understanding. Did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I did. And I had a feeling that it may have been a prior discussion between Priority 1 and TCC, but I'm not absolutely sure. But that was kind of the gist I could get from the delivery that was made. And I guess too, what I want to say is that this plan is timely, and I think it will take care of others that will start to come on and become involved. It's starting to grow, but we haven't actually got our own strategic plan around what we're being supposed to be doing. Because from the time of its inception up till now, it's kind of been like a talk fest where everybody just comes and talk, but we've got nothing concrete around what our strategic goal is and what we need to be achieving. So I think it's timely that this is being requested. I just think it's a shame that it boiled down to the Environment Court having to give us that direction. We should have realised earlier in the piece that we should have been doing this, but at least we're doing it now. So I fully support that too.
Okay, batting order: Councillor Crosbie, Councillor Thurston, and Councillor McMillan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. Just on the accord, when you read it, a lot of it's around how important industry is as well, which you'd expect from Priority 1. I was just interested in your comment that this management plan should be limited to BOPRC's role. And to my mind, that just adds to the confusion. Quick question: what legal status would this have before I carry on?
It would have no legislative authority.
That's a good thing. And I don't think you quite meant it like that, because later on you said you may also look to incorporate, which I would support, TCC's rules and policies and strategies. What the users want is a one-stop shop, in my view, that can be modified and adjusted as you go along with different, court decisions, etc., and also including, the accord as well as a sidebar, because it all helps. But I would be concerned if we just limited it to our role without any conversation or acknowledgement of what TCC's role is and what their current district plan or city plan says. We can separate it out, you can colour code it, you do what you like. But again, if you're an industry over there, you don't want to be running off to another document. You don't want to run off to TCC's and ours and the accord. You'd like to go, well, here it all is up to date. This is the current status, one-stop shop. That to me would be far more useful than just containing it to, our provisions.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. My concern was we've just recently been through the third Environment Court hearing, and a lot of other matters came up by some of the parties that have already been addressed in PC 13 and in the past. My concern with, I mean, I agree that there are other actions that could definitely go in there for that one-stop shop. But if, for example, sulfur dioxide already has some quite clear rules in the chapter that are being implemented via consents. If there were to be further actions included for sulfur dioxide, it's just doubling up on what we already have. So that's just one example. Just the idea is the broader you make it, the longer it takes and the more it costs. But if there are some reasonable, for example, we're going to be coming back to council with any draft that we've run through the working party. So council will be able to say, actually, what about some of these things? And I expect that the working party will suggest a lot of these things that you've just suggested.
In my mind, it should be just a compilation of where everything's at the moment. Clearly, it's going to change over time. That's the point I was trying to make.
So just before I go to Councillor Thurston, so where are we landing Councillor Crosby's comments in relation to your recommendations? Because it is a different scope. So can perhaps you think about that, and Councillor Thurston and then Councillor McMillan.
Yeah, excellent report. Thank you so much. In Rotorua, as you know, we've got this heavy focus on the pending PM 2.5, which is scaring us beyond distraction, I can assure you. But Karen, can you explain to me why there's not a focus on 2.5 with regard to Mount Maunganui, and it's a heavy focus on 10? I may have missed something here, and my apologies, but I would have thought with the advent of 2.5 coming at us, that would have been the focus. So.
Yes, thank you, through your chair. My understanding is that PM 2.5 is not a significant issue in Mount Maunganui airshed. We do have monitors in there though, close to dwellings. So if they indicate any kind of anything to worry about, we can action that. But currently the PM 10 is the primary focus. Rotorua is definitely a PM 2.5 issue.
Because it's a much finer particulate, yeah.
Yes, much finer particulate, yes. And yeah, it's the burning of solid fuel that breaks it right down to that small one. So almost all the PM10 that we get in Rotorua is PM 2.5, whereas the ratio is just different in Mount.
Okay, thank you.
Kapai, Councillor McMillan.
Oh, thank you. I kind of understand Councillor Thurston's confusion there, because this kind of goes round and round, and I clearly hear that, but then I also clearly hear that it is an issue, 2.5. So I'm still a bit confused about that, because I think I started to say that, like your sort of exact words there, and then I was almost like, oh my gosh, I'm a lamb to slaughter, because there is some 2.5 issues here, and so for an elected member to sort of state, oh, we don't have an issue with 2.5 is almost like sweeping an issue under the carpet. And I was like, oh my God. So yeah, that's a bit confusing. But anyway, that wasn't my question. My question was on the last point, your last bullet point on this, on the slide about the consents parameters. Can you just, are you able to get it back up again? My question is, can we have a further and further sinking lid on those parameters? Like, is that what you're implying there in the management plan, that we're kind of screwing down the lid tighter and tighter?
For the review of consent clauses?
Yeah.
No, to be a review of existing clauses. Most have legal, what's the word, coverage. They can't be screwed down until it's time for the consent to be reviewed. So there's
but when consents come up for renewal, can we have a sinking lid on tighter and tighter consenting requirements? Is that what you're meaning there, or?
Yeah, I can sort of do a little bit of, policy 12 does have quite a lot of provision for that, and that the focus is on getting the airshed into compliance. with the NES as it currently stands. So there is an intent for everyone to at least meet best practice at this stage, and then to continue to improve.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's the iterative management that's in policy 12.
Iterative
So
management.
the short answer is yes. And
Yeah.
the good news is that a lot of those consents are up for review reasonably soon.
Yeah.
And council staff and industry are already working towards those. So.
Yeah. I just had a slight addition to the 2.5 corridor, and that is with, my understanding is that central government are no longer bringing that in. Is that right? So
Delayed, as far as we know.
yeah,
so-
sort of indefinitely. It's kind of off the table.
Yeah.
So can we still, if it was an issue in, and I'm still a bit vague on this, in Mount Maunganui, could we still bring that into this management plan if we decided to bring 2.5 in, or is that because central government have got it off the table, we couldn't bring it in?
So all PM 2.5 is PM 10. So it's just about what the ratio is. So it's already included in the PM 10 proportion. So when you're managing PM 10, you are also managing PM 2.5 at the same time. Does that help?
No, I'm kind of even more confused. I thought the 10 was a bigger particle, and the 2.5
bigger, yes.
Yeah,
So,
you
but-
need a specific
But that
focus
includes
on
all the
it.
smaller ones as well. So 10 is anything from 10 microns and below and smaller. So the 2.5 is small. So it's included in that same section of the particulates. So you have sorry, getting super technical. So you have TSP, which is your total suspended particulate. That's everything that can be suspended in air for any period of time. And a lot of that is your big dust that just falls onto surfaces and you can see. And then the smaller proportion is the 10 microns or smaller. So that's your PM10, and that's the stuff that can be inhaled.
The 2.5.
Yeah, or the 10, so for example, the larger ones are to here, but your 2.5s go right into your lungs.
Yeah.
So yeah, that smaller proportion. So you are still managing for, so for example, in Rotorua, we've been managing for PM10 for over a decade now, and that is also managing the 2.5. The main
Okay.
source. Yeah.
So we are managing 2.5 in Mount Maunganui Airshed, even though it's not specifically written in this management plan. Okay, thank you.
You will all be asked to write an essay, which will have to be in by Friday, 5 o'clock, on the difference between, Okay, batting order. Councillor Nees, Councillor White, Councillor Scott.
Thank you. I do have some sympathy for Councillor Crosby's view, and I understand your proposal to make it a Bay of Plenty Regional Council airshed management plan, because it is our swim lane and it would be able to develop it quicker and keep it simple. But I guess my question is, have you talked to Tauranga City Council about this and about what their view would be with regard to making it a joint activity? Because they are operating in the airshed, and they are through their land use consents are actually in control of who is actually operating and what they're able to do within the airshed. So have you talked to them about, what would be your ideal scope for an airshed management plan, and what sort of level of engagement would you like within it? Because I think that, because we had a conversation yesterday about perhaps having to work differently with our TLAs and try and seek collaborative partnerships, etc. I just worry that by doing this and keeping them out, they might think, we're not as important.
I was actually, I've just worked briefly, and I've only briefly conferred with Mark on a widening of the scope. I was just going to say we focus on our role, but we obviously keep an open mind. We are working with a group here that will have their own interests and needs. So if TCC do have resources and they have ideas and they want to make this a joint project, then that would be appropriate, in my opinion.
But just quickly, at least can you put in links to, their provisions at a minimum. I mean, that's not a huge cost.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just thinking about the implications for Māori. Obviously, this is a wider community issue, but obviously with Ngāti Kuku, Ngaitarangi and Whareroa, that there's a hell of a lot of emotions in that particular space. And I guess there's concern that it might end up just being lip service to their desire to get real change going. Anything from moving the port to whatever else it is, they've got that whole sort of desire out there. So what's the state of play right now with them their involvement in this particular scenario that we've got before us? What's their involvement at the moment? And how are they actively involved? And okay.
As this is the very sort of first conversation, initial start of the project, we're just getting underway now, discussions with the committee. As Ngāti Kuku in particular has strong input with the Ngāti Equality Working Party, we'd sort of see that there'd be that immediate ability to communicate the issue management plan with them via that process.
Yeah, thank you for this. Look, it's really important. It's vital. The effect on health that's real and measured is massive, especially for the people of Whareroa Marae and the people who work there. So I'm totally in favour of this. Some of the things that I was going to ask about has been mentioned. So whether it's a compilation or whether it's at least links, and definitely working with TCC. The critical thing is about speed, I guess, and that's what your limiting factors are, which then really makes the important stuff, I think, is a communications plan around this, because there is a lot of emotion, there's a lot of misunderstanding. We've seen some of it today. I didn't know, because that was a question I was going to ask about the PM10. So as part of the process, the communications with the wider, so there's obviously the working party, but then whether it's through priority one or whatever other means you have, is just have a communication plan as well as part of that. I think it's really important.
Councillor McDonald.
I'll make it quick. I guess I want to follow on really from what Councillor Crosby has raised about this being a one-stop shop. But if there is an issue about not meeting a time frame that you're looking for, I'm just wondering if this actually is a management plan for the Mount Maunganui airshed, or is it really giving a wider view and information around PC13 and what that means to the airshed? Because I guess my issue, if it appears that we're writing this for our sake, the regional council, if you've been part of the air quality discussions, we're not always received well at those meetings. I mean, it's only just coming to the position now where I guess our presence is a lot more palatable. So I guess what my fear is in having this, it's almost, I could hear it now, where is everybody else in this plan? So are we calling it the right thing? And should we be calling? Because what we've been striving for in that forum is a collaborative collective. And if I were to look at this, if I was wearing the industrial hat, I'll probably, think, well, no, this was really, they're just looking after themselves. So I think we need to really think about what is it that we're trying to do. If it's specifically to take care of PC13 matters, which I support, because I think there needs to be another step from just what's come out of the Environment Court. But is it really a management plan for the air quality? Because I think it even goes further than just PC13 here. It's about the relationship of the community in there. It's the relationship of those industrial companies that are there and the impact that they're facing for them. And it's also about the communities that in the first instance impacted from where they live. So I think we just need to think a little bit wider of what this is specifically for. And from what I'm hearing, it's not actually the management plan for the airshed. It's a plan addressing PC 13. But you know, I could be wrong, because I want to go back to what Stuart said, and he's absolutely correct. Everything we do in that airshed and the planning that we do it, and specifically strategic plan moving forward, it has to involve everybody that sits at the table that have been sitting there since the inception of this. So you know, I'm really placing that with you. You know, look at the question, you know, look at it. Is it really a management plan, or are we just merely addressing PC 13?
Well, how's that for a challenge, Karen and Mark? So you've heard, I think, yeah. What are your views in terms of, okay, you started off on one track, you've had the councillors' input, which is taking us down a wider track. So how say you?
I think for me, I've done a few action plans for this council, and we're talking about putting together a list of things that you're going to do in this example to make the air quality better in the Mount Maunganui airshed, and that could come from TCC and or regional council and industry. So those are the key players out there. Sometimes compiling that list can be very, very fraught and take a long time. And I did an action plan that took 8 years, and it still didn't really get to that point. Another action plan took 2 years. So the bigger you make it, the more time it takes, the more it costs. And this is obviously for council to make this decision. Are we prepared to have an action plan that says regional council will do this, regional council will pay for this, regional council will start this? That could be what comes out of it if we don't keep the scope reasonably tight. So, but as I've said, we could come up with that, the community could come up with that list, and we will be coming back to this council to say, what are you prepared to accept in this management plan? So if that is what if the council would like to broaden that scope, we can absolutely broaden the scope and then come back to the committee next year to say, this is what the community have said. Where do we stand with that? That was the concern about trying to keep the scope tight, was to keep the timing and the costs low. Keeping in mind that we've just been through 4 or 5 years of Environment Court to introduce the rules which have the big fangs out in this airshed and are making the difference. And in theory, we shouldn't have more rules that come out of the action plan. So the theory is that it shouldn't be too controversial from that respect, but there could be other actions out there that cost a lot of money.
Really, we're saying this is a first step on a longer path. And if that's made clear, then I think, you know, the parties will understand that that's where we are, but appreciate the fact that we're doing something fast. And that's where that Commons comes in, to let them know this is not the end of the story, it's the beginning of the story.
What I am hearing is that it sounds like we want to lock out the community. That is absolutely not the case. The Mount Airshed Working Party has everybody, I believe, and Ruben can comment on this, everybody, I believe, who has been a part of this, some right from the beginning and some a bit further along, but I think everyone is sitting around the table that needs to be. And if there is someone out there who thinks they should be at that table, then as far as I know, the membership isn't strictly closed and can join that group and be part of that. And just be part of that development.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just a couple of things, I think. Have you had a chance to engage with the new chair, Paul? I think that should be the next step. I mean, Paul is vastly experienced in this kind of stuff, and being a former resource consent lawyer. And secondly, I get what you're saying, but I'm still struggling to understand the complexity of what you're articulating. If we integrate some of the provisions of TCC in some shape or form. So I'd like to see a new scope to see how you picked up the conversation today and bring it back, say, early next year, or even, like, it's too late. I think we've got a meeting coming up next week from memory. This week, yeah, which is not in our diary, by the way. It was taken out by mistake. So it's too late for that, but have a chat to Paul see what his view could be on that more broader proposal of bringing in, particularly TCC's provisions.
So propose a motion.
That
Is there a seconder to that? So that's,
that we engage with Chair Paul Cooney, and secondly come back with a more broader scope for our consideration.
seconded by councillor Scott.
Can I just make a comment about that? Because that's almost, going back to this report, it's almost the thing that staff considered and then decided not to do, which was to go via the Mount Air Quality Working Party and then back to this council. Am I correct? And then you decided actually to get things done quickly, we're much better to just press on with this. So that was kind of the first thing you considered. So are we simply sort of rejecting your thought process and going back to actually this kind of needs to go through the Mount Air Working Party?
With respect, I'm not suggesting that. I was just suggesting that you run it past the chair in the first instance, because if you wait for the next working party, which not this week's one, but
be too long.
Probably March.
So just a quiet word with the chair. Okay.
So I was going to ask about whether you want a time, just an indication of speed as being of the essence.
I'm a bit puzzled about that, to be frank. I mean, it took 30 years for us to get to this mess. And we really do need to take the appropriate time, to make the appropriate improvements. Rushing it to get a half-baked document, in my view, is not a good use of resource. I'd rather have a complete one that might take, the balance of 2025, maybe into 26. At least it'll be useful.
Aren't we limited by the court instruction?
No, the longer we take though, as long as we can go to the court and say we are developing it, I think that's good. But the longer we take, every time we go up in front of the court for a consent application, for example, they say, where's the action plan? I guarantee.
So motion's been moved and seconded. Further debate, discussion. There is none. I'm going to, Ruben, did you really want to talk?
I'm super keen, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Just perhaps to pick up a couple of things that I've heard from around the council table. I think all the things that you're asking for are happening at the moment, whether they're strictly in this management plan or not, maybe is not the most important thing. Like Councillor Crosby, I think what you're saying about the community needing one place to go is 100% correct. And it may be that that's a website that has what we're doing, what Tauranga City doing, Toitū Public Health, I wouldn't leave out of that, industry as well. And I think that's what the Mount Air Quality Working Party is trying to achieve. Just coming back to what Councillor Thurston and Councillor McMillan were talking about in terms of PM 2.5, when Toitū commissioned ESR to do an assessment of our data back in 2022, essentially what they said was there have been significant improvements in PM 2.5. They're compliant with the WHO daily guidelines and almost compliant with the annual guidelines. We'll have an update on that report on, I think, Thursday at the next Mount Air Quality Working Party meeting. And my understanding is that that trajectory continues. So the discharges from industry aren't creating the same sort of PM 2.5 issue that we see in Rotorua. And then the third and last thing, Madam Chair, was just around this iterative improvement policy, which has been introduced through PC13 and is essentially the sinking lid that councillors were talking about. So every time a consent comes up for renewal and or review, improvements are expected to be made. So we will see a reduction over time into a range of contaminants, including PM10, PM 2.5, sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you for that, I think. Does any of that change the motion? No. Thank you. Wonderful. Motion's about to be put. All those in favour, aye, against, carried. Now, I have to tell you something. I'm old enough to remember the debate around this council chamber about whether we would invest another $500,000 in air monitors. And my goodness gracious me, what a debate it was. So haven't we come a long way? So it's cause for celebration. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for your report. Well, let's throw on our timesheet out, isn't it? So that's a lesson to you two who are coming up to talk about the pest management thing. Quick. Okay, consultation. Are we just going to take this report as read? Because it's a pretty comprehensive and pretty easy to understand report. Do we take it as read? Do you want to talk to the report?
Not at all. I'm known for being brief with wanting to speak, so I can talk if you'd like me to.
Well, I think it's pretty comprehensive, councillors, don't you? You're going to move the recommendations, Mr. Chairman. You're going to second them, Councillor White. Further debate and discussion around the, don't you dare talk about Canada geese.
I just want to ask a question about turtles. But I'm happy to move. No, I did notice in the consultation that people were concerned about what actually happens to these turtles when they are discovered. And this is one of these questions that I almost don't want to ask, and I almost didn't ask, because there's such a prehistoric Tonga, and I know they're not native and they are therefore a pest, but what does actually happen to them?
So at the moment, staff do respond to sightings, but because they're not in our pest plan, we have no mandate. If they make their way into the plan as a result of this review, the proposal is that council will respond to any sightings of them in the wild. If you're asking what happens then, they would probably be euthanized, which comes at a cost.
And what form of euthanasia?
I can't answer that. But we do have to follow all the protocols about humane euthanasia.
Because I know we had one, and Chris will be able to, we had one came up in our Friday update probably a year and a half ago now, and I did email Chris to say what happened to that turtle. And Chris said that there was a rescue organisation, or there was a rehoming. I know we're talking scale here, and I know I'm singling out a species because it's sad for all of these species that don't belong in this country. But there's something about turtles, the fact that they're these thousands of years old. I don't know. I just want to be reassured that if they do have to be euthanized, that there's potentially a rehoming option, that's a first option. And if they are euthanized, that it's absolutely instantaneous and humane.
So there are turtle sanctuaries every now and then, but if they do need to be euthanized,
I just find this funny, and
I did actually ask this question being an owner of a turtle. But if they do need to be euthanized, they use vets, and there is a temperature control that they chill them down, things like that. So it is a humane process, and there are protocols around that. It's not something we've come up against a lot in council, but that's what we're moving to.
Okay, thank you.
And just to add to that, I don't think there is a turtle rescue place in the Bay of Plenty. I think it's over in the Waikato, the closest one.
I think Stephen Lamb was the name of the rescue.
Maybe from now on.
Councillor Nees.
Thank you. In your consultation, did you talk to ex-councillor Noble at all?
No, I'm pretty sure he was on our direct stakeholder list that would have got so we composed a stakeholder and interested persons sort of database, and we reached out to everyone on that database, letting them know that the amendments were out for consultation. I did not receive a submission from him.
No, well, if it was an email, he wouldn't have got it, number one. Number two, he is always very interested in pest management, as people will recall, and I just
I do
wanted
recall.
to check, because I have to see him before Christmas, and I don't want to have another conversation with him that I put in a submission and nobody responded again. So I just want to check whether or not he would know about this.
I'll confirm that for you. I'm absolutely sure he was on the list, but I'll get back to you.
We have a motion. It's been put and seconded. Further debate and discussion? There is none. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against, and carried. And now the lucky last, Te Uru Kahika River Managers Special Interest Group. Mark.
Kia ora koutou. I think Jenny's putting up a presentation. So this is in a response to a promise I made to you about a year ago that you may have forgotten, but here I am. So I'll take the report as read, but I've got a few highlights to work through in this presentation. Hopefully this thing works, it does. So those who are unfamiliar with the Te Ura Kahika structure, there it is in front of you. And the River Managers is one of the lead groups. And that River Managers group is made up of 16 councils. We meet 6 monthly. We have a champions group which meets monthly, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But our convener is Graham Campbell, just acknowledging that's a very young picture of him, so which I'm sure he's very pleased about. And Graham's been the driver for about 10 years now for the River Managers. One of the key documents that we commissioned back in 2017, produced in 2018, was Hiding in Plain Sight. So that was basically a look at the practices that we utilise across the country, and with the aim of putting together a plan to lift the levels right across all 16 councils. And from that, there were 4 work streams that were put together, and we had a 5-year plan. And then since that 5 years is over, we've now got a 10-year plan, and we've got slight changes in those work streams. So I put in the report, I gave some brief bullet points about those particular work streams. So enabling collaboration is led by Lee Griffiths from ECAN. Sustainable funding, project delivery and support is led by Graham Campbell. The new one that we've put in place, which is policy influence and implementation. So there's a whole lot of things facing us in the river space and in the development space. And so Nick's leading up that. He's from Auckland Council. One of the key things was our people, that we had a shortage across the country in quality people, and it's about attracting people to the River Managers area, and then obviously educating them as well. So there's a whole lot of short courses that are run across the country, with whether they be webinars or actually workshops in Wellington. And then the last but not least is best practice, which has been led by me since 2019. So the couple of the key things, of course, we've been involved in is sustainable funding, and councillors are hopefully well aware of the work we've been doing in this space. So started with the shovel-ready projects back in 2020, and we had a number of projects that have progressed because of that. And then we started to work on this before the deluge. It's down there as 2.0 because we had to redo it after Cyclone Gabrielle. And of course, what we're trying to do is get the government back to the table to contribute to our river schemes, because the costs are just too high for us to manage by ourselves. So of course, we've been lucky enough to be granted 20 million in funds for tranche 1 of before the deluge. And we've just put in the application for tranche 2. So there's another 14 million that we've put in for that. That's been analysed this week by our group, our executive group, and then go on to Shane Jones and his team early next week is the plan. One of the things we did is we created the Resilient Rivers Communities website, so we could report about the work that we've been doing and the upgrades to the various systems across the country. So if you haven't had the opportunity already, I'd recommend you have a look. It's some nice updates and nice stories there. Because I lead best practice, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about the best practice work stream. So one of the earlier documents that we put out was engaging with Māori. So we worked with Kataraina's team, and I had Paula Chapman working on that in conjunction with Northland, who are very strong in this area as well. And so a few years ago, we produced this document, and it's been referenced across the country by the other river managers. Another one is the floodplain options and assessment. In our words, that's river scheme sustainability. So I'm sure you're aware that we're leading in this area across the country. And so the findings that we've made over the last 10, 12 years has been shared with the other councils. They're slowly picking it up. But some of the larger councils are now active in this space, which is great to see. And I'll just acknowledge that Nick Newman from the Climate Change Group is actually helping us across the country with that transition. Another one is legal obligations. So each of the councils have the same obligations under Rivers Acts and soil and conservation activities and so forth. And there were common questions that keep coming up. So our team, with a little bit of support from Greater Wellington, have put together some legal obligations that the river managers can reference. Another one, topical one, is Room for the River, and we commissioned a piece of work to, as it says there, an application of Room for the River. So that was produced about this time last year, and there's been several workshops. A number of our staff have gone through the training, and in the background are doing some of this work across our rivers. Another one that's been in place since 2014. So our Stock Bank design and construction guidelines are the only ones in New Zealand, and they've been adopted by the river managers since 2017 as the go-to document. We've recently updated it to basically bring in more of the geotechnical properties right across the country. So again, another valuable document. And then the most recent one that we've produced is our hydraulic modelling guidelines. So that's now being rolled out across the country as the go-to. It's the most up-to-date and most comprehensive. This is all independently reviewed. It's not just from me, by the way. So what's underway? So we've commissioned a piece of work, which is actually Kyle Christensen, who I'm sure you're all very familiar with, to look at some national riparian management guidelines. So he's busy talking to Tony Dunlop from our team about willows, and talking to other councils around adopting native species and so forth. So we're hoping that about June next year we'll have that. And another thing that we're working on is innovative practices. So engineers, just like me, work away and produce something and not tell anyone about it. And so we're currently trying to extract that information, and we're finding some good stuff there that can be shared across not just the river managers, but also the TAs as well. A big emphasis from the regional chief executives is around asset management. Obviously, we're facing litigation at the moment, and our asset management practices are under the microscope. So it's a big focus for the RCAs. So you don't need to read everything that's on that slide, but the essential bit at the top is that we're following national and international best practice, and we're trying to get all of the 16 regional councils to work on that. And there's a working group that I'm leading in conjunction with Kirsty Brown, who's of course our asset management manager. Back in 2018, there was assessment done by Tonkin and Taylor as part of that hiding in plain sight document, which looked at the maturity of the asset management plans. You can see there that we're at the top, and since that time we've moved further up, and so we're just short of the advanced stage. Hoping that in our March, so we meet 6 monthly as a group, hoping that in March of next year, we'll be in a position to update this document. And I'm obviously very hopeful that some of those lower ones are moving up with the support that we've been providing them. Another area of focus is in flood warning. So we've been working as a group since about 2021. And just to take you through it, across each of the councils, flood warning or flood management is handled by different groups. So in our area, it's the river managers through myself. In other areas, it's through the data services SIG. And others, for example, in Waikato, it's through the hazard management area. So we've brought those three groups together into the National Flood Warning Steering Group, and I managed to coerce Fiona into being our sponsor. And so we've been, as a working group, in place for almost a year. Prior to that, we were sort of existing by ourselves. And we've sort of got our stuff together. Basically, as you can see, it's a join between those three SIGs, and our vision is that floods are managed to support community safety and damage reduction. And it's, of course, the key thing is to lift the standard across the country again. So we've got had quite a few activities that we're working on. We've got into the state where we have an annual flood warning workshop and symposium. We had a rather large one down in Wellington at the Te Pae Centre. We're very well attended by both regional councils and the likes of NEMA and Civil Defence and GNS and others. And we were quite lucky to have Minister Mark Mitchell actually turn up and be a keynote speaker. So it's a bit of enthusiasm coming out of that workshop / symposium. Another piece of work we do, similar to that asset management maturity assessment, is the flood warning manual assessment. So we did our first one in 2022, and there was some action plans at each individual council. And then we've done another one again this year in preparation for that workshop. So those are the topics that they're assessed against. We use Tonkin Taylor as the independent assessors, using some international sort of assessment. And unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of movement. There's a little bit of movement across the councils, but ideally we want to be in a situation where we're in the capable to efficient areas, and at the very least, I think that's, what's that say? What's this middle one? Defined, thank you. But as you can see there, it's dominated by those lower areas. So there's another action plan. There's a number of things that we're doing as a steering group on everyone's behalf. We've had to take that step because of the resource issue across a number of the councils. And we weren't seeing an improvement. So we're trying to work on items that is beneficial for all councils to help them move forward. One of them is a flood warning manual template, because we've got our nice flood manual, other councils work off 4 or 5 different documents during a flood event, and you really need to bring them all together. So the burning question is, where are we on this? We're in the blues and greens. So we're leading in this area, and we're offering support to the other councils to bring them up to standard. There's other councils that are in this sort of vicinity, but we're definitely in front. It's not a competition, by the way. That's my presentation. Thank you.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you, Mark. Really interesting questions. Councillor Winters first. I beg your pardon.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair, and congratulations, Mark. Hey, the budget at the back of the report on the last page of this agenda, and you said briefly about Fiona's sponsored one of the headlines. What's our contribution to the total budget for this whole 16 regional councils coming together?
Yeah, there's a graduated contribution depending on how large your council is. We're in the higher council ones, so I don't have the number to hand, but it's, I guess if you you divide it by 16 and then times it by 2, that's probably a good indication, so.
Okay, I'll do that.
Okay, so councillor Shirley, councillor White, councillor Easy.
Congratulations, Mark. Good picture there. How is it that we scored the $20 million, which is about a third of the total nationwide pūtea or somewhere in that order? And is that because of our excellence and submission processes? And is that disproportionate amount of capital that we got, is that likely to have an adverse impact on the second tranche that's coming?
Councillor, the first thing is that Gisborne and Hawke's Bay were taken out of that assessment because they had the 100 million came through as relief for Cyclone Gabrielle. Second thing is you have to have a local share, and so the funding is 60%, and of course the local share is 40%. We're all ready to go. There's a number of the other councils that have just had these projects sitting there. They've got no funding, and they have to scramble around and and try and find the funds. So we're ready. We've got applicable projects, and we've got the support of this council.
Councillor White, councillor Easy, Chairman, councillor McMillan.
No, just an acknowledgement, Mark. Thank you for your sterling work on behalf of the council. I can see you're a lead player in all of this. And while you might be humble about your role, I think your continued support for it is certainly, I acknowledge, and I'm sure others do as well. And it's a big ticket item for everybody and for the government as well. So to be front footing it for the council, I think is a big thing. So I just wanted to congratulate him.
Should acknowledge that, like with anyone leading it, it's the team behind you that are vitally important, and we have a very good team, both in engineering and assets and rivers and drainage. So,
Gold star to the team, Mark. I know it's not a competition, but a gold star is always helpful. Hey, we at our last regional sector group meeting, Simon Upton presented the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, and he was talking about an idea around centres of excellence around data collation through the EPA, but there was consensus around the table that we thought that it would actually sit really well with it Te Uru Kahika. Has that come through to the team around, because I think we were talking about environmental data, but also trying to find economy of scale around river modelling, and because there's such a, I guess, a shallow pool across the country with regards to river engineers and that kind of work, that are finding a way through Te Uru Kahika to help the whole country.
Yeah, so it's certainly a topic of discussion. Nothing has been formalised yet, but I guess through my presentation you can start to see that some things are already happening, and it's just not just in the river space. It's right across all of the activities that we undertake at regional councils. So I guess it's watch the space. Something will develop in the future.
That's my question: is that conversation did come through to you guys?
It certainly has. Yeah.
Similar to Councillor Iti's question, again referenced by the PCE, the concept in terms of the river management SIG is ultimately, if it's agreeable, to have something like a CCO. If you go down that pathway, the opportunity for graduates to see a career pathway in a wider organisation across many engineering disciplines has got to be enhanced. That's what the PCE was referring to. So I note here in your capability and recruitment thing, you have some initiatives, but I don't see in there a targeted graduate recruitment process through the universities that have engineering as a discipline.
So there is. So what we do is we work with each of those universities, and we go to all of their open days and put up stands and so forth. The emphasis has been on the graduate engineers, for the last few years. And what I've been trying to do is actually get into the polytechs as well. So if you look at our engineering team, half of the team have got degrees and the other half have got diplomas. So we need to focus on those engineering staff as well. So that's just like the next step that we're trying to do, but certainly the graduate attraction and the graduate program is in place. We've got one graduate in our team, and we've got a cadet program as well, which takes in the diploma engineers. So.
I suppose what I'm trying to get to is that I think if you want to aspire to have that CCO type organisation, you need to identify those really good graduates coming out of university and bring them into the organisation and foster them in terms of, you know, come and see us when you graduate, as opposed to monitoring scholarships, all those sort of things that triggers an interest from, you know, day one or year one, year two.
Just before you, Councillor McMillan, at the risk of daring to even seem to be strategic, CCO. Hello, sorry, Mark, private joke that only I get. But, you know, what did I say? Te uru kahika, she's heading off here. Goodness gracious me, but that's strategic, so I won't go there. Councillor McMillan.
Oh, thank you, Mark, and thanks for your leadership and really exciting report to read. I'm really interested to receive this sort of information on an ongoing basis. Maybe I don't know what that looks like, but I was particularly stoked to see the big emphasis on nature-based solutions and allowing room for rivers. And my question is around a decision-making matrix. We've been talking about decision-making earlier today, but in terms of your profession and your industry, how do you what sort of matrix do you have that allows you to a point to go, okay, structural engineering isn't going to get us out of this, or it's not actually the best use of money. What we really need here is to make more room for the river. It's going to hurt at first. Then obviously there's the whole community engagement side of that. If it's people you need to move, it might not be people. I don't know. It depends where you are. But yeah, what does that matrix look like, and how do you know that you're emphasising room for rivers enough? Because obviously we see globally and nationally that hasn't happened historically. So this is a change management process. So it's kind of like, I suppose, innovative environmental engineering. That's a new space to a degree. So is that in the early stages, or is it really refined?
So our aid for decision-making process, we use what we call the multi-criteria analysis. And so what we do is we look at each option and we assess it. We use a nice simple system, which is a traffic light system. And with the additional one, we have a black light, which is the fatal flaw if it's just no way that particular option is going to work. So it's assessed against a number of criteria, and just recent examples, we've been working with the Opotiki community on options for the river scheme there. We agree on what we're looking for, and we agree on those assessment criteria, and then we go through each option with them, and we score it. And then you end up with basically a nice table which has got all the different colours on. You can very quickly see which ones are, the best ones to go forward. So we've had one session in Opotiki which went really well a few weeks ago, and we got another one with another group on Monday. A more recent example of that being put in action was at Nongatawa, where we went through it with the community reference group, and in that one there were 3 nature-based solutions that were that went forward. So we had 3 typical engineering ones and 3 nature-based solutions ones. So and in fact the community put one of those back in under our assessment. One of them we only had 2, and they brought the 3rd one back in. So if you're looking for evidence that it works, I'd suggest that that's one.
The questions or comments? Congratulations, Mark. Superb. Absolutely superb. And ditto councillor White's comments. So move receipt of the report. Seconded, councillor Scott. All those in favour, aye, against, carried. So this is the last meeting of SNP. So ngā mihi to you, to your team. Again, just to reiterate on behalf of all of us, our huge respect and thanks for all of the work that's gone in this year. To you, Jenny, you have been nothing short of professional, and it's been a pleasure. To you, Ngā they just don't come any more pleasant and professional than you, and I have been blessed to have had you as the champion. You really are one out of the box. To you, Kat, you've been superb as the co-chair, and long may you continue to show great enthusiasm. And to all of you, thank you for your input, and I wish you all the best for 2025. Thank you, over and out.